Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dark Sleep Radio. I love sharing real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot and relax. Today, Mark could join us again, so stay tuned of what he has to say, which encounter he knows. If anybody else here knows some scary UFO encounters that they saw or heard from, comment down below. Now, let's let Mark talk.
The fog hung thick between the pines that morning, making the air so humid my shirt stuck to my back. It was around 9 a.m. when I parked at the small trailhead outside Cedar Hollow. I always preferred early morning hikes, enjoying the forest's quiet before the weekend crowds arrived. The start of my hike felt ordinary. Birds called in the distance while sunlight occasionally caught the wet leaves, making them sparkle. My boots made soft crunching sounds against the muddy trail as I walked up the ridge, enjoying the solitude and letting my mind wander. Everything changed when I stopped to adjust my backpack. Looking down, I noticed footprints on the trail ahead. At first, I dismissed them as marks from other hikers, but something wasn't right. These prints were oddly shaped, too long, and unusually narrow. What really unsettled me was how perfectly they aligned with where my feet would land, step for step. I tried convincing myself it was just worn spots in the trail or my imagination playing tricks. But as I continued walking, things got stranger. The prints didn't just appear ahead, they seemed to mirror my movements exactly. Each time I shifted my weight, a faint impression would form in the mud just before my foot landed. My heart started racing when I realized what was happening. I looked around the trail, searching for someone who might be playing a prank, but saw only fog and wet pines. Even when I picked up my pace and checked behind me, the prints kept appearing, following me as if they were being made right alongside my own. I whipped my head around, expecting to catch someone hiding in the bushes, but found nothing. In the heavy silence, all I could hear were my own footsteps and breathing. The fog clung heavily to everything as I hiked along the trail, wrapping around my arms and neck. All I could hear were my footsteps in the soft mud, my own breathing, and water occasionally dripping from the trees. Something felt off. I kept looking behind me more times than I realized, and there they were, footprints following mine, perfectly aligned with each step I took. I tried reasoning it away, maybe another hiker, walking strangely, possibly barefoot. But that didn't explain how precisely those prints matched my own. By the time I reached the clearing, I was sweating despite the cool air. I stopped to rest on my trekking poles and survey the area. The fog rolled in low waves near the ground, but the clearing was empty. And strangely, the mysterious footprints ended there. Looking closer at the prints in the mud, they seemed real enough. They were dark with moisture, clearly pressed into the ground, but something about them felt wrong. Too perfect, too intentional, like they didn't quite belong in our reality. I decided to head back, telling myself it was just my imagination, just tricks of light and shadow in the fog. The return trip was quiet, wrapped in the same thick fog, but something new was wrong. My own prints were visible heading back, but the strange ones that had followed me were gone. Completely gone. My stomach knotted as I tried not to stare at the ground, telling myself it didn't matter what I'd seen. When I reached the trailhead, everything changed. My boots sat exactly where I'd left them hours ago when I'd parked, clean and dry as if I'd never walked the trail. Everything, my backpack, trekking poles, jacket, looked completely untouched. The mud around the trailhead showed no signs of any footprints going into the woods. The whole area looked exactly as it had that morning before my hike. I called out, thinking someone might be playing a cruel trick, but the fog swallowed my voice. The parking lot was empty. No other cars, no people anywhere. I drove home in a daze, half expecting the road itself to disappear beneath my wheels. The trail memory haunts me even now. I still can't piece together when it ended, or at what point those footsteps stopped following me. The whole thing feels like a gap in reality. Something my brain can't fully process. I remember coming home that day, dropping my pack in the living room. Everything seemed normal. My boots, my jacket, all of it. But I couldn't shake off what had happened. Those prints that had matched mine perfectly, step for step. I tried distracting myself with dinner and TV, but nothing worked. That night, my dreams were filled with the trail. Invisible eyes watching me, something keeping pace just behind. I woke up drenched in sweat, sheets tangled around me. My boots sat by the door where I'd left them, but when I touched them, my hands trembled. The memory of the trail's mud clung to me even though physically nothing was there. The next morning, I had to go back. I needed to prove to myself it wasn't just in my head. The forest seemed different. The fog was lighter, the air fresh and clean. I walked to the same clearing, but the mud was completely smooth. No footprints anywhere, not even my own from yesterday. It was like nothing had ever walked there. I tried finding logical explanations. Maybe some animal had made weird tracks. Maybe the fog had played tricks on my eyes. Maybe the forest had somehow erased everything overnight. But none of that explained how the prints had copied mine so perfectly, or why it looked like I'd never even been on the trail. I've told a few friends about it carefully. They usually laugh it off, blame it on exhaustion or a weird dream. I can't really argue. Part of me doesn't even want to know what really happened. All I know is that for those few hours in the foggy forest, something was there with me, matching every step. Then it vanished without a trace, leaving a wall, nigh fragments of memory that feel like a warning. I still go hiking, but only on different trails now, in broad daylight. I make sure to bring company when I can. Each bump in the pavement still feels strange sometimes, especially when I think about that fog and those mysterious prints that followed me. The streetlights made harsh circles on the empty asphalt that night. Not a single car passed by, no neighbors shuffling to their driveways, just silence, the kind that pushes against your ears. It wasn't normal for my quiet suburban street outside Portland, where you usually hear at least distant traffic. My alarm shocked me awake at 3 a.m. I never set it for that time, always 6. As I reached to hit snooze, a voice slithered under the digital beeps. "We need more time," it said. Nothing I'd ever heard before. The house was impossibly still. No humming fridge, no creaking floors, not even wind against the siding. When I checked my phone, it read 3:20 a.m., the time had actually changed since I went to bed. I'm always careful with my alarm, so either something had shifted the time or, well, I didn't want to think about other possibilities. Looking out my second floor window, I noticed something wasn't right. The neighboring houses looked normal enough, but strange shadows stretched across their lawns, too tall and straight to come from trees or streetlights. I blinked, and they vanished. It made no sense. My apartment building was secure with working locks and alarms. Nothing should have felt wrong. Then came the bathroom mirror, fogged up without any shower running. Something had been breathing on it, leaving tiny streaks of droplets. These days, when I close my eyes at night, I still feel those invisible footsteps right behind me. Keeping time, waiting, I stepped out of my apartment barefoot onto wet pavement, though it hadn't rained. The hallway boo behind me was dead quiet and oddly cold, with just a hint of ozone in the stairwell, that sharp smell you get after lightning strikes. The weather had been clear all day, which made the scent feel wrong. Something was different about everything outside. The street, the cars, the lawns, they all had this strange coating. Not quite frost, but similar. When I touched a car, the metal felt weirdly warm and its surface was impossibly clean. No fingerprints, no scratches, nothing. I walked down the street with my phone's flashlight on. The silence hit me harder with each step. No traffic noise, no birds, no wind in the trees, just complete, heavy quiet. It had started earlier in my bathroom when I noticed something odd in the mirror. I'd wiped away the smudges, checked the door was still closed, and gotten dressed before coming out here to investigate. At the end of the street, the small park stopped me dead in my tracks. There was this perfect circle in the grass, like something had landed there. The center looked almost sterilized rather than burned. When I knelt and touched the grass, it felt wrong, like plastic that had been heated and molded. It seemed to vibrate under my fingers. That's when the humming started. A deep, pulsing sound that I felt more than heard. My flashlight started flickering, and above the trees, I saw them. 3 bright circles of soft light hovering there. They moved slowly, deliberately positioning themselves right above that circle in the grass. My throat went dry, I couldn't scream. I just ran back to my apartment, the air throbbing around me. When I looked back from my street corner, the lights were gone, but that circle was still there in the park. Inside my apartment, I found my fully charged phone was suddenly dead. I plugged it in and stayed awake until sunrise, afraid to sleep. The key appeared on my nightstand again, right next to my phone, but just beyond my reach. I knew it hadn't been there when I went to sleep. The brass metal looked ordinary enough. No special markings, just some light scratches that oddly resembled my fingerprints. Strange, since I'd never touched it before, at least not that I could recall. Everything else seemed perfectly normal that morning. My alarm had reset to 6 a.m. as usual, and the park outside looked completely ordinary. No circles in the grass, no scorched earth, no mysterious residue. The air carried the lingering scent of rain on asphalt from the previous night's shower. Living alone in my small townhouse on Ashwood's outskirts felt especially isolating after dark. When I tried explaining what happened to my friends, they dismissed it as stress or an overactive imagination. But I knew better. The voice, the lights, the circle, they were real. My bed had even felt unusually warm, as if someone had just been sitting there. I began setting my alarm for 3 a.m., but it never went off again. The street returned to its usual suburban rhythm of distant cars and barking dogs. Yet small oddities kept catching my attention. Objects slightly moved on my desk, shadows that didn't align with light sources, and a faint humming in the walls at night. Sometimes I wake up in the darkness, certain I've heard that same voice whispering, "We need more time." I still don't understand why it chose me, or what caused everything outside to become so perfectly still and quiet that night. When I look at my alarm clock or step outside near dawn, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. I remember the circle, the lights, and that whisper. I reached for the key once but pulled back. Something about it felt wrong. While I try to maintain a normal life, some nights I leave my window slightly open, curtains loose, hoping for another glimpse. I haven't seen anything, but I hear it sometimes in the quiet hum of the house. Whatever it is, it's patient, waiting, and not finished with me. The experience has taught me one thing. Time isn't always what it appears to be. The scratches weren't random. They matched my fingerprints exactly. I discovered this while examining them under a magnifying glass, though I hadn't put the key there myself. At least, I didn't think I had. It started about a week ago, and now the key showed up every morning on my nightstand. At first, I thought it was just Liam playing a prank. I texted him about it, but got no response. I didn't push the issue. Looking back, that was dumb. No one could have gotten into my locked bedroom without leaving some trace. I searched the whole place, checked all my locks, drawers, and closet. The key didn't fit any of them. More strange things started happening after a few nights. The hardwood floor showed tiny drag marks. Sometimes I caught whiffs of ozone or metal in the air. I tried to blame it on stress from my long shifts at the lab, or maybe the constant rain against my windows. But the key kept appearing, the scratches got deeper, and those weird smells lingered. Finally, I decided to catch whatever was doing this. Set up a small lamp and pretended to sleep, keeping my eyes half closed. At 2:14 a.m., I saw it, a pale, featureless shadow that moved like a smear of light across my room. It glided to the nightstand, placed the key down softly, and vanished. The clock never moved, complete silence. I didn't dare move until sunrise. My security camera should have caught something, but the footage only showed static and one frame of an empty room. Timestamped 3 minutes too early. My phone worked perfectly, but no one had any answers. The house had been empty except for me. The scratches on the key kept getting deeper after nights when I didn't stay awake to atch it. Each morning, there it was on my nightstand, perfectly positioned, mocking me. I started leaving notes, post-its asking, "Who are you?" and "Stop leaving this here," and "I see you." But no answers came. The key seemed to anchor me to the townhouse. I tried to escape, to drive away somewhere, but I always came back. Sometimes I'd wake up in strange places. The kitchen counter, the bathroom sink with no memory of how I got there or how the key moved. It never showed up during daylight hours, only after midnight when the house fell silent. I kept detailed records in my journal, dates, times, weather patterns, the strange metallic smells, the scratches, every odd sensation. One night everything changed. The lights in my bedroom dimmed evenly, not flickering but fading. The air turned cold, that metallic smell got stronger. The key lifted off the nightstand, hung in the air for a moment, then slid toward the edge like an invisible hand was holding it. When I reached for it, a weird tingling shot through my arm. The room hummed, vibrating in my chest, then suddenly stopped. I tried locking it away, put it in a box, sealed it in a drawer with tape. I left for work thinking some distance might help, but when I came home that night, the drawer was open, the key sitting right on top. Either someone had copied my key perfectly, or something was watching me knowing my every move. The thought made my skin crawl. Then came the dream. Or maybe it was a memory. I saw myself floating above my body, the room dark, except for the key's faint glow. In the corner stood a tall, thin figure with impossibly bent limbs and a blank face. It reached for the key, and my body responded without choice. I felt pressure in my chest, complete powerlessness. When I woke up sweating, the key was there, its scratches deeper than ever before. Every night, I checked the key on my nightstand, a seemingly ordinary brass key with impossible scratches that somehow bear my fingerprints. A locksmith once told me it was completely normal. Nothing unusual about it. When I mentioned the fingerprints, he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Keys can't copy fingerprints," he said. But there they were, clear as day. I've tried everything to understand where it comes from. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, audio recordings, none of them work. The footage ends up corrupted or shows an empty room. Yet the key appears without fail, those mysterious scratches perfectly preserved, untouched by human hands. At night, I sometimes catch whispers, barely audible, just metal sliding against air. Maybe they're words, maybe nothing at all. I've learned not to fight it. The key has become my constant companion, following me wherever I go. I've considered moving across the country, but deep down I know it would find me. It knows my patterns, my movements, where I sleep. One night, I was out in my boat on Crescent Bay, a spot where I'd fished alone countless times before. The air was heavy with humidity, everything coated in the scent of salt and damp wood. Around midnight, something changed. The water became unnaturally still, like glass. And then I saw it, a pale white glow spreading in circles beneath the surface. My first thought was the pier lights, but the pier stood dark and empty. The light pulsed rhythmically, almost like breathing. I forgot about my fishing line as I leaned over the boat's edge, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. When I dipped my hand in the water, the glow followed my movements, rippling beneath my fingers. Now I live with the key's presence, documenting everything. Each night I study those scratches, wondering if something's watching me, measuring me. I fall asleep knowing it will be there when I wake, just as it always is. And Akai, accepting that its purpose might forever remain a mystery. The glow beneath the waves wasn't like anything I'd seen before in all my years of fishing these waters. Not fish, not currents, not even bioluminescence. This was different. Too steady, too bright, too alive. My flashlight beam couldn't touch it, barely reaching the water's surface. I edged the boat closer, keeping the motor quiet. That's when everything changed. The light intensified until it was almost blinding, and my stomach lurched. The air turned thick in my lungs, like I was drowning on dry land. Something pulled at the boat, not a wave or current, but something gentle and purposeful. I grabbed the edge to steady myself, and then nothing. When I came to, I was lying face down in my boat as dawn broke over the bay. The mist hung low, and the water looked perfectly normal. The strange glow had vanished, but things weren't right. My hands and arms were completely dry. The boat sat exactly where I'd anchored it the night before, but there were no motor tracks in the shoreline sand, no sign I'd moved at all. Standing on the shore, my heart still racing, I searched the bay. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My equipment untouched, the water calm and quiet. But the timing made no sense. I remembered being out for hours, yet my watch showed the same time I'd started fishing the previous night. The sun was just rising with nothing in between. I walked the beach trying to make sense of it. Could I have fallen asleep and drifted back? No. That pulsing light was too real in my memory. My gut twisted with the feeling that the water was somehow watching me, waiting. I kept quiet at first. In a small town where people already thought I was odd for night fishing alone, I didn't want them thinking I'd completely lost my mind. But strange things kept happening. My fishing line nodded in unfamiliar ways. The boat shifted position when I wasn't around, and the sand near the water showed patterns I couldn't explain. The scratches appeared first. Tiny marks on the deck that I couldn't explain, spots of water in places they shouldn't be. Sometimes I'd notice faint ripples across the bay when there wasn't any wind, always in that same spot. I tried to ignore these signs, telling myself whatever had happened was over. But I knew better. It had started that night on the boat. The glow came from nowhere, faint at first near the hull, then spreading bright beneath the surface. When I reached for the edge, the nausea hit me, a spinning pressure in my chest that wouldn't let go. Something held me there, like a hand on my spine. I remember thinking, just don't fight it, before everything went dark. I woke to morning sun and calm waters. The boat hadn't moved, the fishing line still floating where I'd left it. My hands were dry. My watch said only minutes had passed. But the sky told a different story. Hours had gone by. The shore showed no signs, no tracks, nothing disturbed at all. I couldn't stay away. The next night, I went back to the same spot. The moon was thin and pale as I waited for hours, almost convincing myself the whole thing had been a stress-induced dream. Then it happened again. The light returned, pulsing slow and deliberate under the water. The glow grew blindingly bright as the boat shifted slightly. I wanted to start the motor and flee, but my body wouldn't respond. I went home shaking and slept through the day. Friends called to check on me, and I fed them a simple lie about falling asleep while fishing. They had no reason to doubt me, but I knew something inexplicable had happened. After that, I stopped night fishing. I kept my boat tied up and only went out during daylight hours. Weeks passed as I tried to convince myself whatever it was had moved on. Then one evening, I went to check the boat. The water was perfectly still, no wind or birds around. That's when I saw it again, just a faint shimmer under the surface, pale and steady. I stood frozen, watching until the sun slipped behind the clouds, then turned and walked home. That Thursday evening changed everything. The quiet Portland streets were slick with drizzle. The sky a dull gray as I returned home from work. Nothing seemed unusual in my peaceful neighborhood. Just one of those evenings where the world feels suspended in time. The normalcy shattered when I checked my mailbox. Inside were about 20 letters, all in my distinctive cursive handwriting. The shock hit when I noticed the postmarks, dates, weeks, even months into the future. My hands trembled as I opened the first envelope. It bore my name, Anna, and contained impossibly detailed accounts of things I hadn't done yet. Or had I? The letter described my actions from last night with unnerving precision. Pouring water at 9:47 p.m., mindlessly tapping my foot during a show I disliked, checking the locks 3 times before bed. But I had no memory of any of it. The bay haunts me now. During the day, when I'm washing the boat or sitting on my porch, I catch glimpses of an otherworldly glow beneath the surface. It's there for just a moment, like it's watching, waiting. That pull I felt, the blackout, the way time seemed to stop. It all points to something I can't explain. The water isn't just water anymore. It's alive, conscious, aware. I don't try to make sense of it anymore. I know what I saw, what it did to me. That night exists only in fragments of memory, but I'm certain whatever dwells in Crescent Bay is still there. I brought the letters inside, desperate to rationalize what I was seeing. Running cold water over my hands, I tried to stay grounded while fighting rising panic. Maybe someone had copied my handwriting, maybe I'd lost a diary somewhere, but none of these explanations made sense. The future dates kept staring back at me. Despite my fear, I found myself reaching for another envelope, drawn to its mysteries like that strange glow beneath the bay's surface. The letters appeared each morning, written in my handwriting, but dated for future days. They described my movements with unsettling precision, ordinary actions I hadn't yet taken. Opening my coffee mug at 7:02 a.m., checking myself in the elevator mirror, almost spilling my drink. Things so mundane yet so specific that only I could know them. A pattern emerged as I spent hours reviewing these mysterious notes. They detailed my nighttime activities, movements made in darkness that I couldn't remember. Sitting on my couch, standing at the stove, walking the hallway. The accuracy was frightening. Every small detail matched the subtle changes I found in my apartment each morning. A window left slightly open. My phone off its charger, milk sitting out on the counter. I set up a motion-detecting security camera in my living room, determined to understand what was happening. Despite trying to stay awake and monitor the feed, I must have fallen asleep. The next morning's footage showed only a bright flash and unexplained distortion in a 3-hour gap in the timestamp, time completely missing from my memory. More letters came the next day. One described me walking to the nearby park at 2 a.m., touching the edge of an empty fountain. I had no memory of this, yet when I checked my locks, everything was undisturbed. I wanted to tell someone, the police, my friends, but who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy or lying. One sleepless night, with letters scattered around me like puzzle pieces, I noticed something at 1:33 a.m. A strange light pulsed through my blinds in perfect inner tear vals. It wasn't coming from outside or below. It seemed to shine from above. My heart raced as I watched the rhythmic glow, knowing it wasn't just streetlights reflecting off my windows. The letters had been arriving for weeks, each one eerily accurate. The one from last night predicted everything. How the light would pulse in my living room, how my arms would tingle. Now it was happening exactly as written. I couldn't move or scream. The sensation crept along my skin like tiny pins pricking from underneath. I felt myself lifting weightless, floating toward the ceiling. The letters hadn't mentioned this part. The room's edges warped and stretched as if reality itself was bending. The light grew stronger, warming but not burning my skin. Despite my racing heart, I remained frozen, unable to make a sound. No amount of preparation could have readied me for how alien and surreal it felt. The next thing I knew, I was back on the couch. Letters were scattered around me, and the clock showed 4:18 a.m. somehow. 3 hours had vanished. The sun was just starting to rise. Looking at my arms, I noticed faint red marks arranged in neat geometric patterns, like I'd pressed against some kind of grid or stencil. When I checked the letters, one postmarked from the previous night described everything. The floating, the tingling, these exact marks. I tried escaping the next morning. I wanted to drive anywhere, do anything normal. But the letters kept coming, appearing in my mailbox as if by magic. One described me showering at 10 to 7 a.m., brushing my hair, getting dressed, things I hadn't even done yet. My grip on reality started slipping. I began keeping detailed records of everything, the letters, the times, every tiny change in my apartment. Nothing helps. I've slept in different rooms, left doors open, stayed with friends. The letters always find me, always in my hand drawer. Always describing moments of my life I can't remember. I don't know who's sending them or how they can predict things I haven't done. At night, I sometimes hear what sounds like a whisper. The whispers began on Route 47 one night. I was heading home around 11:30, tired from working late. The narrow road stretched through endless cornfields and woods, empty except for my car and the thick fog hugging the asphalt. My old engine hummed quietly while something rustled in the distant fields. That's when I heard my name. Jason. It came like a whisper, barely there but sharp enough to make me grip the wheel tighter. Nobody else was around. No cars, no houses for miles. Just me and that voice in the fog. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, or maybe some animal in the trees. But it came again, clearer this time, multiple voices overlapping and echoing through the mist. I pulled over and stepped out, thinking someone might be playing a prank. The fog clung to my skin, dampening every sound except those whispers. I called out, "Hello," into the heavy air, my voice sounding strange and hollow. No answer came. The whispering stopped. I laughed nervously and got back in the car. Big mistake. As soon as I shut the door, the voices filled the inside, coming from everywhere at once. The vents, the dash, the speakers. All saying my name. Now I live between moments I can control. Small routines keep me going. Making coffee, working, paying bills, smiling at strangers. But I've stopped trusting what I see or feel. Every morning I check my mailbox with dread. The letters arrive like clockwork. Each envelope a reminder that something else is running my life. They predict. They record. I can't fight whatever this is. One night it will be more than letters and whispers. When that happens, I won't know which pieces of my life still belong to me. I just keep going, day after day, waiting for whatever comes next. The whispering started as barely noticeable background noise in my car. At first, I did what anyone would do. Checked everywhere. Windows, glove box, back seat. Nothing there, but the sound remained. When I started driving, something felt off. The whispers stayed at the same volume no matter my speed, like they were part of the car itself. The fog was rolling in thick that night, turning the cornfields into dark walls on either side. I tried to make sense of it all. Maybe it was just radio interference, or the fog playing tricks with sound. I said my name, Jason, out loud to test it. The voices stopped briefly, then came back stronger. Multiple whispers overlapping each other with an almost pleading tone. Things got worse when the streetlight ahead flickered out. I slowed down, feeling increasingly uneasy as the whispers changed pattern, forming almost words I couldn't quite understand. When I tried calling my wife for comfort, the phone rang once before dying. Then her voice came through, but wrong, distorted, whispering my name like a warning. I pulled over, my hand shaking on the wheel. The fog pressed against the car like a living thing. Opening the door slightly, I heard the whispers fade into a deep, chest-vibrating hum. That's when I saw it, a tall, thin shape standing by the cornfield. In a blink, it vanished. Starting up again, I drove slowly through the thickening mist. The whispers came back louder, more urgent, seeming to exist both inside and outside my head. Rolling down the window did nothing to help. Time started feeling strange. I couldn't remember how long I'd been driving. The fog twisted everything around me, making the familiar look alien. When I checked the odometer, the numbers spun wildly before stopping at an impossible distance. The lonely road seemed normal at first. Fields, trees, and the usual rural scenery. But something wasn't right. The fog moved strangely, like I was underwater, and voices started whispering my name in an eerie rhythm. I tried drowning them out, but they grew stronger. The car shuddered without hitting anything, and a strange hum vibrated through the metal frame. Then everything snapped back to normal. The fog lifted, leaving a quiet summer night. The cornfields stood still in the warm air. Nothing looked wrong, but deep down I knew something impossible had happened. At home, I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel and breathing heavily. Everything looked normal. Porch light on, other car in the driveway, house quiet. I spent a long time trying to convince myself it was just my imagination or stress-induced hallucinations. But I couldn't explain the odometer readings, the lost time, or those whispers saying my name. I checked every room inside, locked everything up, and tried to sleep. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard the faintest whisper from the corner. My heart raced as I listened, but there was only silence. I drove the same route the next day in broad daylight. Nothing unusual, just a regular country road. I made a mental note of the spot, planning to avoid it, but somehow I knew this wasn't random. Whatever was out there had known me, had reached into my car and my mind. I've driven that road many times since then, alone and with others. The fog never came back. The voices stayed silent. I tell myself it was all in my head, just stress playing tricks. But I can't shake the feeling that something's still there, hiding in those trees, waiting for me to pass by again. Every night as I drift off to sleep, I swear I can almost hear my name being whispered, right at the edge of hearing. The metallic scent hit me first, something like ozone hanging in the still air. My fingers touched the frost coating my tent, ticking for a moment before pulling away. The ice shimmered oddly, catching light in a way that seemed different from normal frost. I had only crawled into my tent around 11:45 p.m. Now my cheap digital watch read 12:17 a.m. Just 15 minutes of sleep, but that couldn't be right. I clearly remembered drifting off, the cricket sounds, the hard ground beneath me, the weight of my sleeping bag. The night had been typically warm and humid when I hiked in, the sun only setting about an hour before. The scene before me made no sense. A thin layer of frost coated everything inside my tent, the fabric walls, my sleeping bag. Even the zipper handle had ice on it. My water bottle was completely frozen solid. I rubbed my arms, telling myself this had to be a dream or some bizarre weather event. But it was July. I had triple-checked the calendar just yesterday. When I unzipped the tent, the freezing dry air hit me like a wall. The small clearing where I had made camp was dusted with snow and ice. My boots sat half buried in frost, and the puddle I'd been using to clean my gear was frozen through. Every branch on the surrounding trees wore a coating of rime ice. The whole area was untouched, every twig and patch of moss preserved under its icy shell. I walked a few steps, my boots crunching through the frost. Looking up, I saw normal summer constellations in a cloudless sky. No wind stirred the air. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe I'd passed out, or hallucinated, or some freak weather system had moved through incredibly fast. But this was Michigan in July, not February. This kind of frost and ice belonged to winter, not midsummer. I packed up quickly, my boots crunching over frozen moss and gloves sticking to the frost. The whole thing started when I checked my watch. An hour was missing. I remembered every detail up until then. Hiking to the clearing, setting up the tent, making a small fire with marshmallows, crawling inside and zipping up. I could even recall brushing off leaves and the sound of crinkling nylon. Then nothing. The patch of moss near the tent caught my attention. When I touched it, it wasn't just cold or damp, it was frozen solid. The frost covered everything uniformly, with no clear source, no vent, no frozen stream, nothing to explain it. 15 minutes had passed since I first noticed the time gap, and my watch kept ticking normally from there. That's when I heard it, a faint whirring sound from above, low and rhythmic, barely audible. I stood completely still, looking up at the stars. It wasn't wind, there was no movement at all. No swaying branches, no animals rustling. The sound grew slightly stronger, then stopped suddenly. The tree line looked wrong, with shadows stretching oddly in the moonlight. A soft, diffused glow appeared beyond the trees, like a lantern hanging in non-existent fog. It shimmered and pulsed slightly. I wanted to scream but couldn't. My throat was too tight. The glow shifted once, and when I blinked, it vanished. The air had a strange vibration, almost like a hum beneath the frost. It was enough to raise the hair on my neck. I told myself it was just the cold in my nerves, but there was more to it. A weight, a subtle pressure in my chest, like the forest had become aware of me. I tried finding my way back, but everything seemed off. Trees and rocks weren't quite where I remembered them. After what felt like hours but was probably 10 minutes, I reached the trailhead in my car. The familiar crunch of gravel under my feet was oddly comforting in the night. I woke with my head throbbing as if I'd slammed it against the steering wheel. The silence hit me first, a heavy, unnatural quiet that made my heartbeat sound thunderous. No birds, no dogs, not even distant traffic. Just fog doctor ifting over unfamiliar hills and wet grass scenting the air inside my sealed car. The van that had stalked me for the past week was gone. That unmarked white vehicle always lurking just behind me each night had vanished. My phone lay on the passenger seat displaying 8:13 a.m. I sat there, seatbelt still fastened, keys in the ignition, with no memory of how I'd arrived in this empty field without street signs or houses. Time jumped forward strangely after that. My watch showed 12:45 a.m. when I became aware again, about 30 minutes after waking up in the tent. The summer night pressed in, humid and alive, but I couldn't remember traveling the half-mile ice-covered trail. I drove home carefully, my knuckles white on the wheel, checking the mirrors constantly. The forest stayed quiet. No strange lights, no otherworldly glow or hum. Just my engine's familiar rumble as normal reality settled back around me. Standing in my driveway, everything looked ordinary at my house, though my hands remained eerily cold and numb, tingling unnaturally. Inside, my watch kept ticking forward normally. But that time gap stayed unexplained. 15 minutes of sleep somehow stretched into an hour of lost time, with frost and ice appearing impossibly in summer. I haven't returned to that campsite, though it haunts my thoughts. I run my hands under warm water sometimes, watching steam rise, remembering. My bedroom smells normal now. The house stays quiet, everything unchanged from before that trip. On clear nights, I search the stars, wondering if whatever happened above that clearing is still waiting. I wake up sweating some nights, certain I hear that faint hum again, feeling phantom frost in July's heat. I question if I was really gone just 15 minutes, or if I went somewhere else entirely. The scratches caught my eye first, faint marks across my car's roof, as if something that Ingie had dragged across the metal when I wasn't looking. When I reached up to touch them, static electricity jolted down my arm. The hair on my neck stood straight up as I watched the air above the field ripple like cold heat waves, bending like some invisible screen. For 7 nights, that van had followed me, always keeping its distance, never flashing lights or stopping. I'd tried different routes, tried ignoring it, but it stayed with me through every night shift. Now it was gone, and that felt worse than being followed. I grabbed my phone to call Laura, just needing to hear a friendly voice. It rang once before a strange voice answered, low and monotone, crackling through static. Don't move. Wait. Then silence. The line went dead. Standing there in the heavy grass, I spotted tire tracks in the mud. They weren't mine, just a single line leading straight into the field before disappearing. I walked a few steps along them, feeling more uneasy with each step. Something was wrong with this field. It had no real edges, just endless space stretching out. Then I noticed the humming. So low I could barely hear it, but I felt it vibrating through my shoes and up my legs. I ran back to my car, trying to make sense of things. My mind raced through logical explanations, exhaustion, stress, maybe I was sleepwalking. But the fog kept twisting in impossible ways, the hills bending at angles that shouldn't exist. Okay, Ethan, I said out loud, forcing myself to breathe. Nothing like this had ever happened before. I checked my phone again, hoping the GPS would help. The screen showed power, nearly full battery, but the map was blank. No roads, no buildings, just empty field. And somehow I was here, with no memory of how I'd arrived. The morning started normally enough, leaving my driveway, heading west through the fog. But everything after that fades to black. My next clear memory is sitting in my car by those train tracks where something wasn't right. The first thing I noticed was the humming. It vibrated through the whole car, getting stronger by the second. Then I saw it, that strange shimmer above the tracks. Not wind, not heat, just space twisting in impossible ways. When I tried to leave, nothing worked. The doors were locked, the key useless in the ignition. My car frozen in place. My heart raced as 3 soft rhythmic taps came from the roof. "Who's there?" I whispered. The tapping stopped, but the empty field felt anything but vacant. My phone buzzed against the seat. The photo on the screen chilled me. It showed me sitting right there, but wrong. My pupils were huge, my skin an unnatural gray. The shimmering intensified. Strange shapes moved through the air, not quite human, not quite machine. They moved in ways that defied nature, thin and stretched. Time lost all meaning as I sat there, unable to move, my mind screaming to escape while my body refused to cooperate. Without warning, everything changed. The key suddenly worked, the engine roared alive. I drove straight ahead, letting instinct guide me until trees appeared, then roads, then familiar sights. When I finally reached my driveway, the sun was up. Everything looked normal at home, but nothing felt normal anymore. Laura called later, but I couldn't find words to explain what happened. The humming still comes at night, whispering through the walls and floorboards. I can't account for the missing time or find that field on any map. Those shapes in the air still haunt me. Every time I look at my car keys now, I wonder. The city was unusually quiet that Friday night. The rain had passed. leaving behind that distinct smell of wet asphalt mixed with electricity, and the air hung thick with humidity. Like most nights, I was up on my apartment building's roof, following my usual stargazing routine. The small aluminum ladder creaked as I climbed up with my telescope, getting everything into position. I always check the same constellations: Sirius, Orion, and my favorite, Cassiopeia. There was something comforting about how they stayed constant while everything else changed. But tonight was different. As I adjusted the telescope, tightening screws and peering through the finder, something felt off about Cassiopeia. The familiar W shape was missing. There wasn't a single star where it should have been. At first, I blamed the clouds, but the sky above was perfectly clear. Other constellations looked normal, twinkling away like always. Just that one spot was empty. When I reached to adjust the focus, I saw it. A perfect black rectangle where the stars should have been, its edges sharp like they'd been cut with a knife. My hands trembled as I laughed nervously, telling myself it must be some weird reflection or problem with the optics. I tapped the lens and refocused, but nothing changed. "Okay, that's new," I said out loud, my voice tiny in the damp night air. The whole rooftop felt heavier than usual, and despite being alone, the hairs on my arms stood up. Something felt wrong. I checked my phone, 1:47 a.m., and texted Mira, my astronomy-obsessed friend, though I knew she wouldn't answer this late. I kept thinking how she'd probably laugh about this tomorrow. I sat there watching that black patch of sky for what felt like forever. Maybe 15 minutes, maybe 30. The air grew strange, dense, and vibrating against my skin. Then came the humming, so faint at first it was like a distant refrigerator motor, but definitely there. Now I can't stop looking at my hands, wondering what happened while I wasn't aware. What followed me home? And is it waiting out there for the next time I drive alone? The humming started so quietly. I almost missed it. It grew stronger as I looked through my telescope at that strange black spot in the sky. The telescope itself began vibrating in sync with the sound. Then everything changed in an instant. The sky blinked, making the city below ripple like a mirage. I woke up on my back, head against the fire escape ladder with no memory of how I got there. My telescope had been moved, now pointing straight up at the sky. The time was 4:03 a.m., my jaw hurt from clenching it. Hours had vanished, just gone from my mind. Looking up made my stomach lurch. Where Cassiopeia should have been, there was nothing. Not just darkness, but a complete absence of stars. The edges of this void weren't clean anymore, just pure blackness, as if someone had cut a hole in the fabric of space. The surrounding constellations remained unchanged, making that empty patch even more impossible. I checked my photos after climbing down shakily. The last image from 1:52 a.m. showed Cassiopeia clearly. The next shot at 4:05 a.m. captured only blackness in its place, with my telescope inexplicably repositioned. 2 hours were simply missing. The humming followed me into my apartment. It vibrated through the floorboards, barely there but persistent. The telescope pulsed with the same rhythm when I touched it. I tried calling Mira again but got no response. I considered telling someone, posting online, contacting the university astronomy department, but who would believe a story about vanishing constellations, lost time, and mysterious vibrations? Cassiopeia returned the next night, exactly as it should be. But I kept away from my telescope for several nights after that, watching the stars only through my window with the blinds mostly closed. The forest should have been alive with morning sounds, but an unnatural quiet pressed down around me. I woke to gray dawn seeping through Fermutta. Gift my open tent flap, everything coated in overnight rain. Something felt wrong. My sleeping bag was twisted strangely, not how I normally slept, though my pack remained untouched where I'd left it. A weird sensation crawled across my skin as I tried to get my bearings. The mist hung low between trees that seemed... Their spacing was subtly wrong, as if someone had shifted them slightly during the night. You might not notice it at first glance, but it made me question my memory. When I checked my compass, my stomach clenched. The needle spun wildly, completely ignoring north. I tried again, but it kept spinning. I'd come out here for a peaceful solo hike to clear my head, not to deal with bizarre magnetic anomalies. This had never happened before. The silence was deafening. No creek trickling, no wind in the pines, not even insects buzzing. No birds called, no squirrels rustled through branches, just that deep, heavy quiet. I started walking, hoping to spot something familiar, but the forest felt increasingly foreign. Looking at my watch, I was shocked to see 6:42 a.m. I could have sworn I'd only been up for a few minutes, but my damp, stiff legs told a different story, like I'd been hiking for hours. This didn't make sense. The emptiness, the strange hum that wasn't quite there, the missing time, It all felt wrong in my bones. I've gone over it countless times since then trying to piece together something solid. But there's just that black gap in my memory. That vibration, that certainty that for one terrifying moment, the universe blinked, and I blinked with it. Late at night, I sometimes think I hear that hum again, faint through the walls. I look at the slightly tilted telescope and wonder if it will happen again. I haven't gone to the roof alone since then, but the questions keep gnawing at me. I may never understand what happened those lost hours, but I know what I felt. The weight of something unseen and the sky's strange pull. The forest felt wrong that morning. The usual sounds, rustling leaves, chirping birds, scurrying animals, were completely gone. I stopped walking when I realized how unnaturally loud my breathing seemed. The air felt heavy, pressing in from every side, and when I whispered my name, Ethan, the sound died instantly in the thick air. Panic started creeping in, so I pulled out my phone to check GPS. The battery was mysteriously dead despite being fully charged the night before. After some frustrated button mashing, I got a signal. But the map showed nothing but forest. No trail, no river, nothing I recognized. The morning mist made it impossible to tell directions, even though I was sure I'd been walking toward sunrise. My boots squelched in the mud as I stopped in a small clearing to catch my breath. My head felt fuzzy, like something was pushing against my thoughts. That's when I saw them. 3 perfectly round footprints in the dew arranged in a circle around me. They definitely weren't mine. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, though I couldn't spot anyone or anything in the trees. I tried calling the ranger station, but instead of ringing, my phone produced a strange hum. It started soft, then grew stronger until I could feel it vibrating in my chest. The sound wasn't mechanical. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. I wanted to run but couldn't move. Then suddenly, the hum stopped. My compass was on the ground, its needle spinning wildly. When I picked it up again, it pointed north, but nothing around me matched my memory of the trail. Following the compass, I walked until I spotted a twisted oak I remembered from last year. Relief washed over me as I found familiar trail markers, but when I checked my time, it was 9:56 a.m. somehow. 3 hours had passed with no memory of walking. My legs ached and my clothes were soaked with dew. I stopped at a bend leaning against a tree, trying to make sense of what had happened. Everything looked normal now, but something had definitely been very wrong in those missing hours. I keep my compass on the nightstand now, watching for any strange movement. It's been days since that hike, but the memories, or lack of them, won't leave me alone. What I do remember starts normally enough, packing my bag, setting up camp. Then there's just emptiness until I woke up on the trail hours later. The forest felt wrong when I came to. The ferns caught the light in an odd way, and I could hear a creak in the distance, but everything else was off. My backpack straps were twisted unnaturally, and though my compass had stopped spinning, my sense of direction felt scrambled like someone had rewired my brain. I started jogging toward the trailhead, desperate for anything familiar. The birds gradually returned, cautious at first, then more confident. The wind rustled through leaves as if nothing unusual had happened. I kept waiting for that strange hum to return, for my compass to spin again, but it never came. When I finally reached the parking lot, my car sat untouched. It started right up, and I drove home slowly, scanning the trees and roadsides, terrified something might follow me. Every shadow in the dawn light made my skin crawl. At home, I tried writing down everything I could remember. Small details keep surfacing that don't add up. Damp, dirty socks, though I don't remember stepping in mud, mysterious scuffs on my boots. Sometimes at night I hear a faint hum through the walls, just loud enough to make my chest tighten. I've hiked that forest countless times before, but never experienced anything like this. The logical explanations, stress, disorientation, sleepwalking, don't account for the footprints, the spinning compass, or those missing 3 hours. What haunts me most is that total silence, when the forest stopped completely, and the certainty that I wasn't alone in that quiet. Part of me wants to go back, to prove it was all in my head. But deep down, I know the forest has changed. Whatever made everything stop that day isn't finished with me. The forest remembers, and I'm sure it's waiting for my return. Those missing hours, those unexplained footprints, that moment when my mind went blank like someone else had borrowed it. It all points to something I may never understand. The scratches on my forearm caught my eye first. Small, shallow marks like pinpricks, arranged in a pattern I'd never seen before. They definitely weren't there yesterday. My stomach lurched as I studied them in the gray dawn light filtering through the pines. I was sprawled on my front porch, legs tangled in the doormat, jacket twisted around me like I'd been tossing in my sleep. The air felt cool and damp from the night's rain, heavy with the scent of wet earth and cedar. As I sat up slowly, head throbbing, a scrap of paper peeled away from my forearm where it had stuck with something sap-like. The handwriting matched mine exactly. Those same loopy, rushed letters spelling out, "Don't fight them next time." The night before was mostly blank, just fragments remaining. The hardware store where I'd bought rope and nails, the too bright buzz of the gas station's neon, then nothing. My truck sat in the driveway with keys still in the ignition, but the cold engine told me I hadn't driven home. Had I walked? Been carried? The memory fell buried in thick syrup. Inside my apartment, everything looked normal enough. The faint smell of yesterday's coffee lingered. My phone was plugged in charging, its screen showing 3:17 a.m. in bright blue. But that was impossible since I'd gone to bed after midnight. When I checked my phone, all messages and calls from the previous evening had vanished, except for one voice memo. Hearing my own voice whisper, "Don't fight them next time," made me freeze. It wasn't just the words, the sound was distorted, hollow, like someone had pressed their lips right against my ear. I poured coffee with shaking hands and switched on the radio, trying to ground myself in something normal. But under the initial static and low hum, I could hear something else, a whisper underneath. Almost. The night started normally enough until that strange glow appeared in my driveway around 2 a.m. It was pale blue, floating perfectly still above the ground, casting my truck's shadow against the garage door. Not like any flashlight I'd ever seen. Before I knew it, the light had moved closer, hovering right over my porch. Earlier that day, things had already felt off. The streets were weirdly empty for a Saturday and the air was thick and sticky. I'd gone for a walk to clear my head but kept looking over my shoulder the whole time. When night fell, I stayed inside with every light on. I tried to eat dinner but couldn't even think about coffee. It all started with the radio that morning. There was this voice mixed in with the DJ, just one word repeating with the static. I spent hours trying to make sense of it. Break-in? Blackout? Some kind of prank? But nothing was missing, no forced entry. And that piece of paper, I know I hadn't written it, at least not that I remembered. Around 11 o'clock, I heard it, this weird rustling outside in the bushes. The sound was smooth, rhythmic, like footsteps, but not quite right. No crunching leaves, no sound of shoes. When I looked through the blinds, there were just shadows stretched across the porch in the lamplight. Then came that light. I could feel its heat through the window, though it wasn't exactly warm. The air got heavy, hard to breathe. My feet felt like lead. A low hum started vibrating through the floor and my bones, soft but clear as day, the kind that turns your stomach and makes your hair stand up. Somehow I ended up on the porch, right under that pulsing glow, feeling almost weightless. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. Half awake and standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I was going through my usual pre-work routine. Toothpaste foamed in my mouth as I mindlessly brushed, barely paying attention to my reflection. That's when everything changed. My reflection blinked, but I hadn't. I tried to rationalize it, thinking I must have blinked without noticing. But then it happened again. The face in the mirror closed and opened its eyes deliberately while I stood frozen, eyes wide open. A voice pressed into my mind later. Not exactly words, more like a thought, clear and chilling. Don't fight. Next time. I wanted to run, to fight back, but couldn't move. Everything went white. My body felt weightless, like gravity had simply given up on me. My breathing echoed loud and ragged in my ears, but my body felt foreign, disconnected. Hours later, I came to on the porch. The sun was barely visible through the trees, and a piece of paper was stuck to my arm. The yard looked untouched, no footprints, no landing marks, nothing to prove what had happened. My phone had cycled off and on, but the memo remained. The writing on the paper looked fresh. My friends brush it off when I try to tell them. They suggest sleepwalking, stress, too much caffeine. I've checked for injuries and physically everything seems normal, but something feels wrong, like a piece of me is missing or not quite here. The paper sits in a drawer now. I can't bring myself to throw it away, but I don't want to handle it much either. These days, I leave the porch light on every night. I stay away from the driveway, the yard, and especially the woods. Sometimes I still hear that low hum, like a distant open door, and feel the pressure building in my chest. I know it's them. I don't understand why they chose me, what they want, or how I made it back when others might not have. The paper haunts me, and every night I wonder what would have happened if I'd fought back. I think about going outside to face whatever it is to understand it, but I never do. The warning stays with me, and I just wait, trying not to think about what next time means. The double shifts at the pharmacy were catching up with me. I'd been exhausted lately, dark circles forming under my eyes. That evening, I went to my usual routine, brushing teeth. Washing up, everything seemed normal. Same messy bun, same gray t-shirt when I glanced in the bathroom mirror. I shrugged it off as tiredness, finished up and went to bed. The dream started that night. I was back in my bathroom, but something was wrong. The mirror stretched unnaturally from sink to ceiling. The lights flickered, and my reflection stood motionless, staring. When it pressed its palm against the glass, I tried to back away but couldn't move. I woke up drenched in sweat, sheets tangled around me. Fear kept me from the bathroom mirror the next morning. I used the kitchen sink to wash up and my phone camera for makeup, feeling silly but unable to shake my unease. When I finally forced myself to use the bathroom again, everything seemed fine. I convinced myself it had just been my imagination running wild. But then it happened again later that week. While flossing, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. My reflection's movements were slightly delayed, its mouth moving just a fraction behind mine. The more I watched, the more certain I became. My heart started racing, and I dropped the floss, turning away quickly. The strangest incident came after a late night of phone scrolling. I woke up in the middle of the night to find the bathroom light on, something I never left on, ever. When I walked across the carpet to check, I stopped dead in the doorway. The mirror was covered in handprints, dozens of them, as if someone had pressed their palms against the glass from the inside. My blood ran cold as I stood there frozen in place. Water started appearing under my bathroom mirror one morning, not from leaky pipes or a dripping faucet. It seemed to seep from the mirror itself, trickling down the glass onto the tile. My hands shook as I wiped it up with a towel. That was just the beginning. A few days later, I found handprints on the mirror. They weren't on the surface though. They were somehow trapped behind the glass, smeared and desperate looking. My heart pounded so hard I thought the neighbors would hear it. I nearly called the police but stopped myself. How could I explain this? By morning, the prints had vanished, leaving the mirror perfectly clean. I started avoiding that bathroom completely. I brushed my teeth in the kitchen sink and showered at the gym. But eventually, nature called late one night, and I had no choice. I promised myself I'd keep my head down, get in and get out. Of course, something caught my eye. Not my reflection, but the mirror itself. It looked wrong too deep, like a doorway into another room. Shadowy shapes moved just beyond my view. I slammed the door and stayed away for 2 days. When I finally got brave enough to look again, everything seemed normal. Too normal. I stared at my reflection, waiting. Then it happened. While my real face stayed blank, my mirror image smiled. Slowly, showing teeth. I tripped on the bath mat trying to get away and ran straight to the living room, where I slept with every lel right on. Things haven't gotten worse since then, but they haven't stopped either. Some days, everything's fine. Other times, my reflection moves a beat too slow. And sometimes I wake up to find the bathroom light on, even though I know I turned it off. I've stopped trying to make sense of it. The clocks caught my attention first, every single one frozen at 2 or 3 a.m. My phone, the wall clocks in the living room, the digital timer on the oven, all stuck. The screen on my phone still lit up. Battery was fine, but time refused to budge. I'd woken up to an odd kind of silence. Not the normal quiet of night, but something heavier. The air felt pressed down, thick and strange, like the house was wrapped in invisible cotton. Outside my window, the streetlights cast their usual orange glow behind the trees, but something wasn't right. When I stepped outside in my slippers, the humid air clung to my skin. The neighborhood felt wrong. No breeze rustled the leaves. No dogs barked in the distance. I walked to my driveway, then called out just to break the silence. My voice fell flat, as if the sound couldn't travel properly, trapped in its own little bubble. The world looked normal at first glance. Cars and driveways, street lamps burning, but nothing moved. Not even tiny flickers of movement anywhere. When I waved my hand under a street lamp, the light didn't reflect right. My legs felt weirdly heavy as I walked, like pushing through syrup, though the pavement was perfectly smooth. The usual nighttime sounds were missing. No chirping birds, no distant hum of appliances, absolute stillness. These days, I avoid the mirror unless I absolutely have to. The door stays shut, and sometimes I even prop a chair against it at night, though I know that's pointless. Walking past that hallway, I still catch glimpses of movement under the door, like someone pacing inside. I can't decide what's worse, when something happens or when nothing does. The shadows were the first sign something was wrong. They stayed fixed to the ground, refusing to move with me as I walked. My own shadow stretched along the sidewalk, but stayed anchored when I moved. That wasn't right at all. I'd gone outside after noticing the clocks acting strange. The moon hung visible through thin clouds as I walked down the block, trying to convince myself this wasn't a hallucination. A faint shimmer appeared on the horizon like heat waves in the air. Weird for a summer night. I rubbed my eyes and blinked, but it wouldn't go away. My legs carried me to the corner where the woods started behind the houses, though I had no reason to go there. The air felt thicker and colder near the tree line, which I could see more clearly than usual. That shimmer was stronger now, a steady, almost white glow hovering behind the trees. Not moving or pulsing like a firefly, just hanging there. I felt something watching me, a cold prickling in my neck, but when I turned, nothing was there. I blinked, trying to focus. Suddenly, everything shifted. Streetlights flickered, leaves rustled, a car hummed past. My watch said 5:04 a.m. Somehow, 3 hours had vanished. I couldn't remember anything between stepping outside and that moment. I rushed home, heart pounding. Inside, everything looked untouched. The clocks ran normally now. Though the alarm still showed 2004, my phone had the right time. I searched every room, bedroom, living room, kitchen, but found nothing unusual. Even the grass showed no signs of my walking. For days afterward, I obsessed over it. I counted seconds, watched clocks for any pause or lag, found nothing strange. Friends suggested I'd been sleepwalking or dreaming, but I remembered everything clearly except those missing hours. I drove past the woods that night, hoping to see the shimmer again. Nothing looked out of place. I spent the next week walking that street late at night, but everything moved normally, like always. The air was warm but dry that late July evening, the kind of heat that makes darkness feel heavy and close. I had found a small clearing off the ridge to set up camp. My tent nestled between two pines overlooking the valley below. Just me, my pack, and the gentle rustle of leaves. Though I'd hiked this trail many times before, something felt different about the solitude that night, more intense, like the forest was holding its breath with me. After a quiet dinner, I settled into my tent with a book. Around 10, I first noticed the hum, a low, steady vibration that seemed to resonate beneath my ribs. Initially, I thought it might be distant traffic or a generator from some hidden cabin. But this was remote country. No roads, no power lines. The sound didn't come from the trees or valley. It seemed to emanate from the sky itself. I zipped up the tent and listened, trying to rationalize what I was hearing. My mind searched for explanations. Maybe I'd blacked out without realizing it. Maybe some environmental factor had triggered sensory hallucinations. But nothing could explain how my legs carried me down the block without conscious thought, or how the world appeared frozen in place, shadows refusing to move. These days, I keep my blinds closed and avoid going outside at night when possible. Even driving past those woods in daylight, I sense that shimmer lurking just beyond perception. Though my clocks work normally now and life goes on, I feel like a piece of time stayed behind that night, trapped in those frozen 3 hours, waiting for me to remember it. Whether it was something alien or some incomprehensible earthly phenomenon, I remember the pause. I remember stepping into a world that wasn't mine and return. Inch 3 hours later with nothing to show for it. Sometimes when I check the time late at night, there's a tick in the back of my mind, a faint memory of time stopping. I can't tell if it's real or imagined, but I know I felt it. Those 3 hours are simultaneously gone and present. The pause exists in some corner of my memory, a fragment of night I never truly experienced or lived through. And sometimes I worry that with one wrong blink, I'll find myself there again. A strange feeling crept in slowly. First came that constant hum, then the heavy warmth that wouldn't break. I tried to sleep it off around 10, telling myself it was just my heartbeat or something in the rocks playing tricks on me. When I opened my eyes to soft light, things weren't right. My watch said 4:58 a.m., but 8 hours couldn't have passed. The hum had stopped. The forest had gone dead quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. The air felt thick, almost sticky. What really got me was my tent. It was packed up perfectly, stakes pulled tight, rainfly tucked away. My backpack was closed, boots lined up outside like someone had arranged them. But I hadn't done any of that. I couldn't remember doing anything after lying down. The clearing looked exactly the same. Same stones, same pine needles, but everything felt wrong. Walking out with my heart pounding, I searched for signs of visitors. Nothing but my own boot prints from earlier. My compass went haywire, spinning endlessly without finding south. I called out my name, don't know why. My voice came back strange. Like I was underwater, I could only remember fragments from the night. The warmth, the hum, pushing down my fear. Then nothing. No dreams. No sense of time passing. Just a blank space where memory should be. The sun was up but cast no proper shadows. Just a weird misty brightness over everything. My hands worked on autopilot as I packed up, trying not to think too hard about what might have happened. I took the main trail down, staying away from smaller paths. The forest stayed silent the whole way, like everything was holding its breath. When I finally got to my car, my phone came back to life with normal messages, as if nothing strange had ever happened. But something had lifted me out of reality and set me back down, leaving no trace behind. I was doing the most ordinary thing, brushing my teeth late on a Tuesday night. The clock read 11:30, and my mind wandered to work emails and unpaid bills. Then something stopped me cold. My reflection in the bathroom mirror stayed perfectly still when I lifted my toothbrush. The image just froze there, like someone had hit pause on a video. At first, I wondered if I'd fallen asleep standing up. But no, the toothbrush was right there in my hand, dripping toothpaste into the sink. Those eyes in the mirror stared back at me, but they weren't copying what I did. When I whispered, "Okay, that's impossible," my voice made my stomach twist. Later, I went through photos from earlier that day. The usual shots were all there: the ridge, the valley, the trees. But one photo stopped me. My tent from a bird's eye view, centered perfectly in a clearing. The timestamp read 2:30 a.m. I had no memory of taking it, no memory of even leaving my tent that night. The drive home was tense. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something following me. The strange hum that had been there before was gone now. On the road, in the car, even once I got home. Everything in my apartment looked normal, but I couldn't forget the warmth, the silence, my oddly organized tent, or that spinning compass. I've looked up similar stories, time gaps, alien encounters, weird forest experiences. Nothing quite matches what happened to me. I've gone back to TA, Hat Ridge and daylight, trying to piece it all together. The forest seems perfectly normal then, just birds singing and pine needles rustling in the wind. I tell people I just lost track of time, maybe fell asleep outside the tent. But that doesn't explain how everything got packed so carefully, or the compass acting strange, or that aerial photo on my phone. Some nights when my apartment is quiet, I swear I hear that same low hum again, just barely there. My skin prickles and my stomach tightens. I look around, half expecting the air to thicken in time to stop. It never does. I'm here now. My tent's packed away. My boots are dry. My hands don't shake. But somehow, part of me is still out there in that clearing, listening to that strange hum in the darkness. The first time something was off came from my reflection. The face in the mirror showed a wide, deliberate grin I'd never made. As I stepped back, the bathroom light gave a slight flicker. When it steadied, my reflection was normal again. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just toothpaste fumes or stress. But then I spotted a fingerprint smear high up on the mirror way above my reach. When I wiped it, it left no trace. The strangeness kept building. My phone showed 2:47 a.m., though I knew it had been 11:45 p.m. just before bed. The battery had dropped to 46%, despite being recently charged. In the kitchen, the fridge door had condensation inside, as if someone had left it open, but I hadn't been near it for hours. The house felt wrong. An unnatural silence hung in the air. No fridge hum, no clock ticking, nothing. Back in the bathroom to get my towel, I caught movement in the mirror behind me. I spun around to find an empty hallway and a closed door. My breathing quickened as the air seemed to thicken around me. Hoping to clear my head, I stepped outside. What I saw made me freeze. The streetlights were on, but everything else looked off. The houses were too pristine, the lawns eerily perfect. My neighbor's dog stood completely still, frozen mid-stride with its ears up. I blinked and it vanished. Walking to my car through the thick metallic feeling air, I looked up. The sky wasn't right. No stars or clouds, just a strange gray-white glow. The hum started subtly at first. It filled the air, creating pressure that made my ears pop and my legs feel unusually heavy. The moment I reached my car, I noticed the door was ice cold. After locking myself in the driver's seat, I tried starting the engine. It turned over fine, but strange breathing sounds crackled through the radio static. My phone was completely dead when I checked it again. Not just low battery, but completely lifeless. The time had jumped to 3:05 a.m. before it died. While sitting there, I spotted something in the back seat. A folded piece of paper. The message inside was written in my handwriting, though shaky and hurried. Don't fight them next time. Everything else seemed normal, my wallet on the passenger seat, apartment keys on the dashboard. But that note haunted me. I knew I hadn't written it even though it matched my handwriting perfectly. The hum grew stronger as I sat there trying to make sense of it all. The car vibrated beneath me while an intense light filled the sky. My vision started to blur, and despite trying to resist, something pulled at me. Then suddenly, everything stopped. I found myself sitting on my porch as sunrise broke across the sky. My car sat in its usual spot in the driveway. The note had vanished, and my phone was fully charged, showing 7:16 a.m. When I called my boss, everything seemed fine, but I had no memory of how I'd gotten home. Strange things kept happening in the days that followed. Items in my apartment would move slightly. Mysterious patterns appeared in the foggy bathroom mirror. That faint hum returned at night. Most disturbing was my reflection. It didn't quite match my movements anymore. I started avoiding nighttime trips to the bathroom, but curiosity sometimes got the better of me. In those brief glances, I catch something else in the mirror, something waiting with a smile. The whole experience left me with so many questions about the note, the missing time, the pulling sensation of the hum, and whatever entity visited my bathroom that night. The woods behind my Vermont house have always held secrets. Living on the edge of our small town, I was warned never to venture into that dense patch after dark. Our backyard slopes down to meet those trees, and that morning, everything changed. The gray morning light filtered through my blinds, casting a muted glow across my room. My parents had already left for work, and my little brother Jamie was still asleep next door. That's when I noticed them, delicate handprints on my window. At first, I thought Jamie had been playing around, but these were different. Too small, too precise, trailing downward in an unsettling pattern. Following the prints with my eyes, I saw they continued onto the siding and led toward the yard, disappearing at the tree line. My stomach nodded as I realized I was alone with whatever had left those marks. Armed with just my flashlight and phone, I stepped onto the creaking porch. The air carried a strange mix of dampness and metallic undertones like rain-soaked earth. The beam of my flashlight revealed something even more disturbing. Footprints in the wet grass. They weren't normal tracks, they were narrow, impossibly straight, forming measured, calculated steps into the forest. Each impression seemed deliberately placed, as if choreographed. I called out softly, but only the wind answered. Life continued afterward, filled with work, bills, and daily routines. But something had been watching me that day, testing me, and somehow controlling my memories. Now, I keep my movements slow, my hands open, my eyes forward. The note was clear: don't fight them next time. I followed these rules carefully, not wanting another test. Sometimes I still wake in the night to check my mirror, just in case it decides to smile at me again. I hear soft hums in the distance, or catch my reflection moving independently. My heart pounds each time, but I've accepted that understanding might be impossible. Whatever watches me, I won't challenge it again. I never should have followed the prince into those woods. The morning was quiet as I stepped onto the grass, tracking his path until it ended at the forest's edge. Nothing seemed unusual at first, except for a strange circle of flattened leaves that caught my eye, pressed down in a way that looked deliberate, like someone had knelt there. The wet pine and moss scents filled my nose as I ventured a few feet into the trees. My flashlight beam bounced off spider webs and wet leaves until a strange sound stopped me in my tracks. A high-pitched vibration, almost like humming. I couldn't pinpoint where it came from, whether it was the trees or inside my own head. When I spun around, the woods were empty. The prince hadn't returned, but that circle of leaves seemed more wrong now. A shimmer in the air, like heat waves on a cold morning, made my stomach drop. Then I noticed something truly impossible. My porch light was off, though I knew I'd left it on before bed. The shadows among the trees weren't right. One stretched impossibly tall, taller than any pine, and stood unnaturally straight. It tilted slightly, as if watching me. When I backed away, tripping over a root, the shadow didn't move like it should have. It just stayed there, looming over me while my brain screamed at me to run. I tried telling myself it was just morning fog or a trick of the light. But then the humming grew stronger, vibrating through my chest like a tuning fork. The air rippled, and for a split second the whole forest seemed to bend like I was looking through water. The shadow vanished, but new scratches appeared in the leaf circle pointing toward my yard. I ran back to the house, heart pounding, and locked myself inside. When Jamie stirred in the next room, I told him to stay in bed. I couldn't explain what I'd just seen. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, asking if I was up early. The first signs were subtle. My backpack mysteriously moved from floor to chair, the alarm clock showing impossible times as if reset. But what really started it all was that faint hum, the one that seemed to live in the walls themselves. I sat in the kitchen that night, coffee getting cold on the counter, just watching the woods through the window. The fingerprints weren't obvious from inside, but they were there. When morning came, everything looked normal again. The grass had sprung back up, leaves unflattened, the forest as ordinary as ever. Those marks on the window had vanished too. I kept it to myself. My parents would have been worried sick, and Jamie would have just laughed it away. But they came back the next night. Delicate, thin prints on the glass. I compared them to my own hand, pressing my palm against the window. They weren't even close to matching. The hum returned too, barely there but unmistakable, vibrating through the house at night. I couldn't sleep. Every forest sound, branches creaking, crows calling, wind rustling made me jump. The porch light revealed nothing when I looked outside, but I felt watched. Sometimes I caught white flashes between the trees, smooth, quick movements with no real shape. I followed the prints one evening. 5, from the window to the yard right to the forest edge. Standing there remembering that shimmer, that hum, that impossible shadow, my chest tightened and my legs felt like lead. I wanted answers more than I wanted to run away. I took a few steps forward, but found nothing unusual. When I turned back, the prints had disappeared, but the porch railing had tiny scratches, like something had leaned against it from outside. I don't go into the woods at night anymore. A flashlight stays by my bed now, and I check the window before sleep. Those small, thin prints show up every few nights. Always precise, always deliberate. The hum comes and goes. Quick movements flash between the trees, gone in a blink. Whatever's out there, watching and waiting. I still don't know what it wants or why it chose me. The coffee run that morning started like any other, a quick 10-minute walk to the corner cafe through misty streets that seemed unusually quiet. The fog hugged the curbs, creating an eerie stillness. But what I saw halfway there stopped me cold. Across the side street stood an exact replica of my house. Not similar, identical. The same brick exterior, the same windows, even down to that broken porch railing I'd been putting off fixing. The garden gnome I'd placed by the front steps was there too, a perfect copy. My heart raced as I stood there, the cafe forgotten in the thick mist behind me. The whole thing had started the night before, when I'd returned home later than usual. The street was still wet from a recent drizzle, and at first glance everything seemed fine as my headlight swept across the driveway. But inside, something felt off. The armchair had shifted to face the window instead of the TV. The coffee table wasn't quite where it should be. A strange burnt smell hung in the air like abandoned microwave food. I called out, knowing my girlfriend was away at her mother's for the weekend. Silence. I checked the kitchen. Everything there looked normal, with a full fridge and clean counters. I tried to convince myself I was just being absent-minded, stressed maybe, and went to bed despite my unease. Now, standing before this duplicate house, the damp air clung to my jacket as I approached the porch. No cars, no movement, no chimney smoke, just perfect, unsettling silence. The doorknob felt real enough under my touch, cold metal against my skin, but something in my gut screamed not to open it. The rest of my day at work was a blur. I couldn't shake the image of that house from my mind. The office noise seemed sharper. Lunch felt disconnected from reality. When I finally made it home that evening, my house looked normal again, everything in its proper place, no burnt smell lingering. These days, every time I look at my window, I remember that duplicate house fading into the woods, disappearing between the trees. The question haunts me daily. When it returns, will it leave just footprints, or will it want something more? Night after night, the strangeness grew. It started small. Shadows falling wrong in the kitchen, a chair slightly out of place, that odd burnt smell near the living room. I brushed it off as anxiety, kept quiet about it all, and went to bed early hoping to forget. Then came that 3 a.m. wake-up, drenched in sweat. Orange light filtered through my blinds, flickering across the walls despite the dark street outside. When I looked out, there it was, my house, perfectly mirrored across the street, shimmering in the mist. Not a reflection, but something layered over reality itself. I blinked and it vanished. Things escalated quickly after that. One evening, I came home to find my front door unlocked, something I never do. Inside, the furniture had shifted dramatically. Cushions rearranged, books moved from leaves to floor. As I backed away, my girlfriend texted, "Something's wrong with your house." She sent a photo of my living room, completely empty, from an impossible angle she couldn't have taken. The duplicate house began appearing everywhere, in puddles, store windows, even my dark TV screen. Always empty, perfect, sterile. Always vanishing when I got too close. Never visible in photos or recordings. I could only see it from across the street, like some twisted mirror image of my home. A week later came the breaking point. Coming back from an errand, that burning smell hit me again. The furniture hadn't moved yet, but the air felt thick, heavy with anticipation. Standing on my porch, I saw the duplicate house sitting silently across the way, its windows dark. This time was different, though. I could feel a soft pulse beneath my feet, like the house itself was breathing. My hands trembled as I checked the time, trying to convince myself everything was normal. Late May brought that peculiar twilight hour when the world feels unfinished. I was walking home from the corner store, earbuds in, carrying chips and Gatorade. The neighborhood hummed with air conditioners and fresh-cut grass scented the evening air. The streetlights flickered erratically, like they always did before storms, creating an uneven rhythm of light and dark along the sidewalk. That's when I first noticed something wasn't right with my shadow. It stretched long and thin on the concrete, distorted like it was cast by some cheap thrift store lamp. When I raised my hand to scratch my ear, my shadow followed, but not quite in sync. There was this tiny delay, just half a second, as if my brain had stuttered. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. The strange occurrences didn't stop there. A duplicate of my house appeared one night, surrounded by mist that curled around the porch railings. I wanted to knock to investigate, but couldn't find the courage. When the fog lifted moments later, the house vanished. The next day brought more unsettling news. My neighbor mentioned spotting a mysterious figure watching our homes, a tall, thin man dressed in black, standing motionless in the darkness. I tried maintaining a logical approach, installing cameras, checking locks, keeping detailed notes of every incident, but the cameras showed nothing unusual. Just normal streets, normal yards, normal houses. No duplicates, no mysterious figures. Yet the subtle signs persisted. Furniture that moved slightly, burning smells that came from nowhere, shadows that shouldn't exist. Months have passed now. The duplicate house shows up less often, but I'm constantly on guard, checking reflections, street corners, and morning mist. I've stopped seeking explanations. Whatever this is, whether it's trying to warn me or send a message, I'm not sure it even knows I can see it. But I know my familiar world isn't entirely mine anymore. Somewhere, an empty copy of my life waits, and when conditions are right, when the air feels heavy and the fog rolls in just so, I can feel it pulsing, reminding me of its constant presence. The first thing I noticed was the shadow. When I moved my hands, it followed with a delay, not like screen lag, but as if reality itself needed time to buffer. I touched my knee to test it, and sure enough, the shadow lagged behind. Snapping my fingers made it jerk and catch up, like a glitchy video finally syncing. The neighborhood felt off. A lawnmower droned somewhere mixed with sakas chanting in the background. Houses stood silent. The only dog that usually barked at everything just watched from its porch through the railings, weirdly quiet. I started walking faster, hoping it would fix whatever was wrong. It didn't. The lag between my movements and my shadow grew longer. At the corner, there was a full second's delay before my shadow matched my steps. The streetlight above made an odd humming noise while a moth tapped against the glass. Things got stranger when a rental car drove by. The driver seemed more interested in the houses than the road, not even slowing at the crosswalk. As the headlights swept past, they turned my shadow into 3 separate pieces, like someone had taken scissors to it. The streetlight's hum grew higher, the kind of sound you only notice in complete silence. By now, the lag had stretched to nearly 2 seconds. I tried calling my sister, wanting something normal to hold on to. Her voicemail beep came half a second late, sounding eerily distorted. The 12-minute walk home felt much longer, stretching out like pulled taffy. My stomach felt heavy and wrong. When I finally reached our driveway, I hit the porch light switch, needing to do something, anything. The light clicked on with a soft pop. I know it all sounds like typical signs of a power problem. I know what rational thinking should look like at 19. But this felt different. Under the street lamp's yellow pool, my shadow stopped mid-sidewalk. It just stood there, a dark, person-shaped outline, waiting. The space between me and my front door suddenly felt endless. I didn't walk home casually like someone leaving a disappointing movie. I ran, full sprint. My hands moved on their own, grabbing the doorknob, yanking the door shut, clicking both locks into place. The clearest memory I have is the sound, locks clanking, bolts sliding, my own breathing heavy in my ears. I'd run all the way home for no logical reason, all because shadows weren't supposed to act this way. They were meant to be simple, flat, obedient things, not creatures that could wait. From my kitchen window, I could see it hadn't moved an inch. It looked like someone who'd lost track of time and forgotten to leave. When I touched my forehead to the glass to watch, my chest kept jumping. I tapped the window and the shadow responded with a delayed flinch, like someone startled awake from a nap. It didn't have a face or clear features, but it had presence. It had posture. After I blinked, it settled into a smaller shape as if making itself comfortable for a long wait. I tried calling Mom, though it was too late for that. Her phone went to sleep voicemail, her voice groggy and short before the network failed completely. 2 phones, 2 dead ends. The TV droned in the living room, just background noise to feel less alone. The news anchor talked about clear skies and morning dew, but I needed more than that. I needed someone to explain why a simple patch of darkness was behaving like a person, staying put where it had stopped. I stayed up until 2 a.m. in the dim kitchen, blinds open, cold tea forgotten beside me. The shadow remained fixed under the lamp, but it shifted positions each time I looked out. Sometimes it stretched tall, sometimes it curled small like a child. Once it took the shape of someone sleeping. I first noticed it as fingerprints on my kitchen window, thin, parallel smudges I could never fully clean away. No matter how hard I scrubbed, my palms went soft from trying. The marks seemed connected to what happened that night when I saw the shadow under the streetlight, a shape that stood without anything to cast it. The next morning brought clarity with the dawn. Gray light spilled across the pavement, the street lamp clicked off, and the shadow had vanished. I searched the sidewalk, finding only dew in my own shoe prints from when I'd run the night before. The grass was undisturbed, with no trail leading to or from my house. My left eye stung for hours afterward, like something tiny was caught in it. I kept telling myself small, quiet versions of what happened until they started feeling real. That afternoon, I took the long way to the corner store because my legs still felt strange. Everything looked normal. Children's shadows behaved as they should. Mr. Hardro's porch light was off, and the street light stood innocently on the corner. My sister called at noon the following day. We chatted about ordinary things, her upcoming test, a text from her friend. Then she asked if I'd been home the previous night. I said yes, trying to sound casual. She mentioned neighborhood gossip about a kid's shadow that wouldn't move from the sidewalk. She laughed it off as one of those weird coincidences where everyone sees the same strange things. I didn't tell her I was that kid. I kept telling myself I'd imagined it all, but I was tired or influenced by something I'd read online. People often create mysteries where none exist. But later that afternoon, when I cleaned the window again, I found a new mark, a faint print in the corner, like someone had pressed their forehead against the glass to peer inside. The kind of detail most people would miss, but I knew better. I jolted awake at 12:07 a.m. to Claire's call, unusual for her night shifts, which normally only brought quick texts or short check-ins. Her name lit up my phone screen, feeling both perfectly normal and completely wrong at once. When I answered, her voice was all wrong. It started tiny and twisted, like a tape played forwards and backwards simultaneously. Then it cleared for a split second to say Tom before the line glitched. What followed was unsettling. Her voice echoed my name with a delay, each Tom stretching unnaturally at the end like a rubber band being pulled. The storms from earlier had clogged the roads, so I tried to blame bad cell coverage. I'd heard about lightning messing with towers. Claire, you okay? I asked. Her response came weirdly out of sync, as if my mouth knew what she'd say before she said it. Delayed. She started, but the rest came from the back door 2 beats later. The syllables mismatched. I just stared at my phone screen, hoping the pixels would somehow fix themselves. Telling her to hold on, I promised I'd be right there. I grabbed the cordless phone from my nightstand, quicker than going downstairs, and closed the bedroom door softly to avoid waking her. In the week that followed, I made sure to keep the window clean for checking, and left a small lamp on at night to help the porch light. Each day, I walked past that sidewalk, sometimes stopping in the pool of light where my shadow used to linger, feeling the pull when I moved my legs. Life in the neighborhood went back to normal after that. Months passed. Once, I thought I saw that same still shape under a different lamp, but it was just light playing on a parked car. I'd like to say this taught me about mindfulness and appreciation, but the real truth is simpler. Something in me still checks that corner, like double-checking a locked door just in case whatever waits in the light returns to claim its spot. Something felt wrong, the kind of wrong your skin recognizes before your brain catches up. The house was quiet at 12:09, numbers glowing steady on the microwave when they shouldn't have been. The hallway light was dim, thermostat reading 68. Leo, our dog, lay on the couch when I pushed open the back door. His ears perked forward with that mix of curiosity and caution, but he didn't bark or come to me. Instead, he watched the door like he was waiting for something I couldn't see. The yard carried the scent of ozone and wet grass, and the back porch light cast a nervous, buzzing glow. No one stood at the sliding glass door. I called Claire's name, the sound small, against the night. The voice on the phone had said she was at the back door, but for a brief moment, I considered circling the house. Instead, I crept to the bedroom to check her phone on the nightstand. There she was, sleeping on her side as always. Hair in a messy knot, blanket pulled to her shoulders, breathing slow and steady. The room held the faint scent of her shampoo, and the bedside lamp was off. Her phone lay dark on the nightstand, lock icon visible, just inches from her hand. My cordless phone base showed a call in progress, blinking light and all, while my cell phone displayed Claire's name with the call running at 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Nothing made sense except watching her breathe, so I did it twice. When I called her name again, she shifted, mumbled into her pillow, but didn't wake up. In the living room, Leo sighed like someone who'd held tension too long. I returned to the porch, studying the yard and its slick, black trees. The streetlight in the cul-de-sac flickered once before steadying. The back gate stood empty, with no footprints in the thin mud where rain had fallen. I dialed her number on the cordless, letting it ring through the quiet house. It went to voicemail, though my phone still showed an active call. Later, the playback revealed only a beep and a breath, not hers. The call lasted 2 minutes, according to my phone's log, but the audio file showed only a flat line, silence where my wife's voice should have been. I kept replaying it in my office until my ears ached, coffee going cold beside me. The carrier's record confirmed the timestamp, but opening the link revealed nothing but empty space. It had started at 12:07 a.m., though I didn't answer right away. The voice on the line wasn't quite Claire's, or rather, it was hers, but wrong somehow. The syllables separated by static, repeating phrases in an unnatural way. The microwave showed 12:09 while my phone displayed 127 numbers that didn't add up. When I returned the cordless to its base, the indicator light blinked off, showing no active call. My steady hands had started shaking without me noticing. Sleep wouldn't come. I sat in the kitchen, surrounded by an unusual silence, as if the normal hum between walls had vanished. At 1:16 a.m. exactly, the upstairs hall clock ticked forward with its usual patience. But whenever the wind moved through the trees, I'd catch fragments of that elastic voice saying my name, as if through a closed window. The dog would stir at these moments, and when I listened more carefully, the sound would fade. Morning came, and Claire made oatmeal with her typical unhurried motions, humming her half-asleep tune. When she asked about my night, I told her everything. The phone call, the voice, the back door. She dismissed it gently, patting my hand and saying, "You were up too late. You always hear things when you're tired." After kissing my forehead sympathetically, she returned to her stirring. Later that day, I noticed a pale circular mark on Claire's inner forearm like the impression of a ring. When I pointed it out, she brushed it off with a laugh, saying it was nothing. Her bruise was fading, probably just from bumping the cabinet that night. Claire had no memory of getting up and couldn't explain why her phone was on the nightstand, unless she'd placed it there out of habit. Everything seemed normal. Her watch kept time, life went on. Mrs. Entire Holloway, our neighbor, mentioned seeing bright lights from a car speeding through our cul-de-sac after midnight. But the HOA street camera, installed last year to catch petty thieves, showed nothing moving after 11 p.m. Just empty asphalt under sodium lights. I went through the footage frame by frame at home, found only stillness and one brief blue smear, no figure, says, no flashes. The next week, Claire called while driving home from the lab. Her voice skipped through my headset, caught in that strange elastic moment where time seemed to have a seam. We hung up, and she texted later about trouble with her card at the gas station. Eerily similar to my issues at Holtz's highway station the week before. We'd laughed it off then, but that laughter feels hollow now. At night, when the house settles into its quiet rhythms, Claire's breathing, the radiator's clicks, the refrigerator's hum, I think about that stretched out echo needing space to move. Those 2 extra seconds between words that made me check on her, only to find her sleeping peacefully, her phone dark beside her. The facts are simple. I answered a call. Claire's voice came through delayed. I found her asleep when I checked. Her phone shows a missed call, but the carrier's audio file is blank. We started double locking the back door even during daylight hours. The dog seems happier with longer walks now. All I really have is the memory of that voice. It's timing off by 2 beats, like it was recorded elsewhere and played back in our room. And Claire's hair pressed against her pillow. Everyone gathered at my cousin's place near Renovo, a small town in rural Pennsylvania, to celebrate his daughter Emma's 8th birthday. The setup was typical. Above ground pool, grill running, and about 15 kids playing in the yard. It was early June, and the air hung heavy until the sun dipped behind the trees. The kids were running around with helium balloons from the grocery store. Pink, blue, and silver ones that caught the evening light like tiny floating mirrors. Right before cake time, Emma was tugging on a silver balloon when it slipped from her grasp. She chased after it, squealing as it floated away. The laughter died when she didn't stop at the tree line. Brian, her dad, Kay, let out a few times before jogging after her. Soon other parents followed while the kids stood silent, eyes fixed on the woods. I joined the search minutes later. The woods weren't dense. Old logging trails crisscrossed through them, and you could usually hear the road. As darkness fell, we spread out with flashlights. The police arrived, then fire volunteers and dogs. We searched every inch within a mile, but found nothing. No clothes, no balloon, not even traces of her running. It was like she'd vanished mid-step. The volunteers stopped coming after a week of searching, but her parents kept going. That's where my memory turned strange. When she appeared, looking completely normal, and mumbled, not waking. Now I check locks and call logs, sleep with the lamp on sometimes. When wind moves through trees at night, I hear my name and my heart races. I always answer, because what else can you do when something you love calls out wrong? After 3 weeks of searching for Emma, walking trails and checking every shed in the valley, we'd found nothing. The creek searches turned up empty. It felt like we'd never find answers. Then Brian called me at work. His voice was ragged, exhausted. When I arrived at his house, the silver balloon caught my eye immediately. Deflated but intact, lying in the grass at the yard's edge. The string was still attached, and the balloon itself wasn't torn or popped, just empty and wrinkled. The most unsettling part appeared when Brian silently picked it up and turned it over. There, pressed into the rubber surface, was Emma's name. Not written or scratched, the letters seemed molded into the balloon itself, with unnaturally clean edges. The balloon felt wrong too, unusually stiff and cold despite sitting in sunlight, more like plastic than rubber. It should have been brittle after weeks outside, but wasn't. Brian's wife swore the lawn had been empty when she checked it the night before. While Brian wanted to contact police, she refused, not wanting to face more skepticism after their earlier experiences. They settled for storing the balloon in a basement shoebox. Strange things started happening after that. The house lights would flicker randomly. Their dog wouldn't go near the woods anymore, just growled from the porch. Brian's wife reported sensing a presence in the hallway at night, though she never saw anyone. I stayed over one weekend to help monitor things. Around 2 a.m. on the second night, I woke to what sounded like static. Following the noise downstairs, I realized it grew stronger near the basement door. When I opened it, the sound stopped instantly. In the basement, I found the shoebox on the workbench, its lid open, with the balloon inside. Late July brought a reunion with my brother Nate, who'd made the trip down from Minneapolis. We spent our evenings exploring the abandoned farmland of our southern Iowa childhood, a landscape of empty fields, scattered barns, and quiet dirt roads. One hot night around 10, we set out toward the Peterson Creek. The air was thick, heavy with swarms of insects, even after sunset. Armed with just a flashlight, a lighter, and my beat-up pack of cigarettes, we cut through the soybean fields like we did as teenagers. We weren't searching for anything specific, just wandering, sharing stories, and laughing about old times. Midnight approached as we reached the cottonwoods by the creek. The moon cast enough light that we didn't need the flashlight anymore, throwing an odd gray glow across the grass that made the shadows look strange. Then we heard it, my name Matt, called out from somewhere in the trees. The voice was oddly flat, mechanical almost. It wasn't Nate's voice. Later that week, Brian called to tell me his wife had thrown away the balloon, and she couldn't bear having it in the house anymore. He said he understood her feelings. But just 2 nights after that, they discovered another one. It was the same silvery balloon, caught in their driveway's oak tree branches, with Emma's name etched into it just like before. They burned it in their backyard fire pit, but the rubber behaved strangely. While most of it blackened, the letters remained visible as the material cracked and curled. No more balloons appeared after that, as far as I know. Brian and his wife eventually left town, leaving their house vacant for months before selling. I've stayed away since then. But sometimes, driving at night, I catch a metallic glint in the sky, just a flash of reflection from the streetlights. For a brief moment, it looks exactly like one of those silver balloons, floating upward until it vanishes from sight. The letters had darkened, looking almost scorched into the deflated rubber, and seemed larger, as if the material had stretched. After closing the box and heading back upstairs, sleep eluded me for the rest of the night. The night started normally enough until we heard my name called out. The voice was strange, somehow both right beside me and distant at the same time. Nate and I both stopped dead. Then we heard Nate's name in that same odd tone. We exchanged glances as he switched on his flashlight, sweeping it across the tree line. There was nothing there except the slow-moving creek and swaying weeds. We waited in silence for about a minute, but heard only water and insects. The voices weren't just similar to ours. They were exact copies, like perfect recordings. Finally, we started walking toward where the sounds had come from, moving slowly, trying to act braver than we felt. The air changed as we got closer. It was thick and humid, like a damp basement, with this electric feeling you get before a storm. Hi. That's when we heard Matt again, but this time from behind us. We whirled around, breathing heavily, facing empty soybean fields bathed in moonlight. My voice shook when I asked what was happening, but Nate didn't respond. He just stared at me with this vacant look, then started walking sideways into the field, arms hanging loose like a puppet. When I grabbed his shirt, his body was unnaturally rigid. He made these nonsense sounds under his breath. The field suddenly lit up with this pale white light that came from above. It wasn't like a flashlight beam or car headlights. There were no shadows anywhere. My skin felt hot, like standing too close to an oven. I tried to yell Nate's name, but the sound seemed to vanish before it left my mouth. The air felt heavy, and my ears started ringing painfully. Then everything went black. The next thing I knew, it was sunrise. We were both lying in the field, our clothes soaked with dew. My mouth was bone dry, and my arms hurt like I'd been holding them up all night. I don't remember passing out or anything in between. It was like someone had just switched off my consciousness until morning. The night Daisy wouldn't stop barking changed everything. It was early September, and the air still had that sticky summer feel, even at 3 a.m. Her bark was different. Not the usual coyote alert, but something steady and sharp. Like she was trying to warn me about something she couldn't make sense of. I pulled on my boots and jacket and headed outside. When I found Nate later, he was a mess, sweating, pale, rolling around, and asking what happened over and over. Neither of us knew. Then I spotted the burns. Mine was right below my left elbow, 3 sharp-edged triangles linked together, burned deep red into my skin. Nate had his own mark. 2 circles overlapped like a Venn diagram, carved so deep it looked etched. We just saw there for what felt like forever, looking at these strange patterns on our arms. The burns were unlike anything I'd seen before. They didn't bleed or scab, just sat there raw and throbbing. I tried making light of it, suggested we bumped into some farm equipment, but we both knew there was nothing in that soybean field except dirt. Getting back home was strange. Everything looked normal. The gravel roads, the distant barns, but felt off somehow, like reality had shifted slightly. Our devices were dead too. My watch stopped working and Nate's fully charged phone was nearly empty. Mom was in the kitchen making coffee when we got back. She figured we'd crashed in the barn like old times since she hadn't heard us all night. The truth came out when Nate reached for a coffee mug and his sleeve slipped. She saw his mark, then mine. She didn't ask questions, didn't want to know. The healing took weeks. The skin peeled off in sheets like after a bad sunburn, but never blistered. Even after healing, faint pale lines remained, like scars that didn't raise. We talk about that night sometimes. Nate swears he remembers a smooth, endless wall stretching upward. I only remember the voices, our own voices, calling us into the darkness. The night was quiet when it started, too quiet. The crickets had fallen silent, and Daisy, who'd been barking earlier, was now crouched low with flattened ears, just whining. That's when I noticed the glow in my orchard. It wasn't dark like it should have been with that thin moon. Instead, a soft white light poured down from above, illuminating every row of apple trees as clear as daylight. At first, I thought maybe it was a helicopter spraying crops, though nobody does that around here at night. But there were no rotor sounds. There wasn't any sound at all. I started walking from the house toward the trees, about 200 yards away, expecting to spot whatever was causing this light. Looking up just made my eyes water, and when I blinked away the blur, I couldn't see any source. Just that strange downward glow. Something felt off at the orchard's edge. The air crackled with static electricity, making my skin prickle. When I touched one of the tree trunks, it felt warm and seemed to vibrate under my palm. Then I saw it. Every single apple on every branch was trembling, all moving in sync like they were being held by invisible hands. The hair on my arm stood up. I knew I should probably go back to the house and call someone, but I couldn't look away. The light suddenly intensified for about 3 seconds, bright enough to turn the trees into dark shadows. Then everything went black. The normal sounds rushed back. Crickets, Coyotes in the distance, Daisy barking again like she'd just woken up. I stayed on the porch until sunrise, watching the orchard. When daylight finally came, my heart sank. Every tree was bare, not a single apple left, not even on the ground. Usually, I spend weeks carefully harvesting by hand, but something had stripped every branch clean in one night, leaving only neat cuts where the stems had been. I was heading back from western Nebraska after a long day's work. Near midnight, I stopped in Kimball, one of those tiny towns frozen in time. The main street looked straight out of the 70s, with just a couple gas stations, a motel, and an old diner still running its neon sign. The whole orchard was stripped bare, but something wasn't right. No footprints, no tire tracks marked the grass. The ground looked untouched. At first, I thought maybe thieves had come in the night with equipment. But there were no signs. No ruts, no broken branches, no ladders or bags left behind. Nothing made sense. By noon, my head was throbbing. One eye kept going blurry, and I had this metallic taste. In my mouth, even Daisy knew something was wrong. She hid under the truck, growling whenever I tried to get her out. I started to call my friend who runs a peach farm in Traverse, but I couldn't finish explaining. The silence on his end said enough about how crazy it all sounded. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark kitchen watching the orchard through the window. Daisy started whining again around 2:30. I held her collar to calm her down. Though there was no glow this time, the trees seemed to move. Not from wind, but like the branches were stretching upward all at once. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. By 4 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I walked through with a flashlight. The ground was dewy but unmarked, like no one had ever walked there. The branches were bare and hard, with smooth stems where apples had been, as if they'd never grown at all. The headaches finally eased after 3 days, but I couldn't look at the trees without feeling sick. 20 years of work gone in one night. When neighbors asked, I made up stories about disease or blight, anything normal. They didn't push for answers. But sometimes, around 3 a.m., Daisy starts that nervous bark again. Even without looking, I can feel that strange brightness beyond the window. Lighting up the orchard, I won't enter anymore. The diner was nearly deserted when I stopped in, just a trucker nursing his coffee and a waitress wiping down the counter while country music drifted from an old radio. I slid into a window booth, ordered a basic burger and fries. Simple food for a late-night pit stop. The meal came quickly, and I was about halfway through when something strange happened. A crushing wave of exhaustion washed over me. Not your normal road trip tiredness, but something deeper, like my whole body was powering down. I tried to shake it off, munched a few more fries, and looked out at my car under the streetlight. Everything seemed fine. I lifted my fork, stabbed another fry, took a sip of soda. That's when things got weird. It was like a jump cut in a movie. One moment I'm sitting there about to eat, the next I'm standing outside on the sidewalk in front of the diner. My car was right where I'd left it, but now the engine was running, headlights blazing. My first thought was I'd blacked out from exhaustion. But this felt different. My hands were sweaty, legs wobbly, like coming out of surgery. Even the air felt wrong, sharper, colder. When I opened my car door, the dashboard clock showed 3:14 a.m. I felt sick. I'd sat down to eat just before midnight. 3 hours had vanished. My phone confirmed it. Battery almost dead, but showing the same time. I gripped the steering wheel hard, trying to make it make sense. I almost convinced myself I'd just fallen asleep in the booth until I looked back at the diner. My table was completely clean. No plate, no half-eaten burger, nothing. Like I'd never even been there, but I could still taste the food in my mouth. I went back inside. The lights were dim now, closing time approaching. The trucker was gone. The waitress was at the counter, phone in hand. She jumped when I walked in, looking surprised to see anyone. "Kitchen's closed," she said as I stared at my empty booth. My car was idling in the parking lot when I left the diner, but I had no memory of starting it. The waitress swore I hadn't been there, even though I clearly remembered ordering a burger just hours before. The spotless surface of the counter mocked me as I stood there, feeling increasingly uneasy until I finally backed away and left. The drive home was the longest of my life. I kept watching the clock, hoping it would suddenly flip back to midnight, and found myself staring at the empty passenger seat every few miles. By the time I pulled into my driveway, dawn was breaking. My stomach felt hollow, but not from hunger, more like I hadn't eaten in days. The sandwich I tried to make tasted like chemicals, forcing me to spit out the first bite. The bruises started showing up the next day. The first one appeared on my forearm, a perfect purple circle, the size of a quarter. It didn't hurt when I touched it. 2 more followed that week, identical marks on my shoulder and thigh, as if someone had carefully stamped my skin. They've mostly faded now, but I can still see traces of that first circle under certain light. I never told anyone about losing those 3 hours. How do you explain that you sat down for dinner just before midnight, and suddenly it was 3 hours later with your car running outside? The diner's still there. Same neon sign, same lot. I've driven past it since then, but I can't bring myself to go inside. Whatever happened that night left its mark on me, literally and figuratively. The Polaroid showed up later that spring, wedged in my mailbox between ordinary mail. It was a nighttime shot of my bedroom taken from the doorway, showing me sleeping on my side with my hair. I found the first Polaroid on my kitchen counter one morning. It showed my bed at night, messy with half-pulled blankets. 3 figures stood around it. They were blurry, caught mid-motion, with pale oval faces I couldn't make out clearly. The timestamp read 2:43 a.m. I lived by myself in a small house on the outskirts of town. No family, no roommates. That week, no one had visited. I checked every lock, window, and even the attic. Everything was secure, with no signs of break-ins. At first, I thought my friends were playing a prank, but something felt wrong about those figures. They were too thin, unnaturally shaped. Not like people in costumes at all. When my sister visited later, she dismissed it as faux to shop, but this was a genuine Polaroid. You could feel its thick, stiff texture and catch that lingering chemical smell. That night was rough. I kept the bedroom light and TV on, but around 3 a.m., strange clicking noises came from the kitchen, like static popping. It lasted about a minute before stopping. The next morning brought another Polaroid in my mailbox, a close-up of me sleeping, taken from directly above. The police officer who responded said it was probably just a trespasser's sick joke. He recommended installing cameras. I bought some basic Wi-Fi cameras for the bedroom and hallway, determined to catch the culprit. But when I checked the footage the next morning, both cameras had failed at 2:41 a.m. 30 minutes of recordings were just static. And there in my mailbox was another Polaroid. Inside my bedroom, everything looked normal except for the wider open door. The 3 blurred figures had returned, with one now standing closer to my bed, its head cocked as if studying me. When I called the police again, the same officer showed up, clearly irritated. He dismissed my concerns about the cameras cutting out as typical Wi-Fi issues, and explained they couldn't do much without signs of forced entry. Over the following week, Polaroids appeared every few days around the same hour. They always captured me in bed, sometimes alone, sometimes with those figures present. I stopped telling the officer about the figures. His disbelief was obvious. The 6th photo was particularly disturbing. It showed me sitting upright, eyes wide, staring directly at the camera. I had no memory of this. I convinced my sister to stay over one night to see if having someone else in the house would make a difference. She agreed to sleep on the couch while I tried to rest in my room. No Polaroid appeared the next morning, the first break in over a week. But when I asked about her night, my sister seemed confused. She could only remember lying down and then waking up, nothing in between. Later, she confessed to feeling strange, like she'd experienced some kind of time skip. 2 nights later, the photos started again. This one was different. Taken from outside, peering through a small gap in my bedroom curtains. It showed me in bed with one of the figures standing right beside me. That night, I secured everything, nailing windows shut, barricading the door with my dresser. Despite these precautions, at 2:40 a.m., I felt the bed sink slightly. The air grew thick and buzzed in my ears. I couldn't move or even blink. When it finally passed, I jerked awake at 3:12. The dresser hadn't moved, everything was still locked. That was 3 months ago. While no more Polaroids have appeared since then, only normal mail comes now. But sometimes, when I wake up, things don't feel quite right. The train windows showed something else that morning, not the usual blurred fields rushing past. I still remember every detail of that Tuesday in late November, the fog of my breath at the platform, catching the 712 like always. The car was familiar, filled with the regular crowd, about 2/3 full. I took my usual spot, halfway down on the left by the window, across from that man in the Navy suit who always read a physical newspaper. It stood out among all the glowing phones. Everything started normally enough. The train swayed and rumbled like it always did. Windows fogged at the corners, while I zoned out with my earbuds in, scrolling news on my phone. But 15 minutes in, just before the old grain silos, something changed. The train began to slow. Not the smooth deceleration of approaching a station, but irregular, like someone tapping the brakes repeatedly. The first sign something was really wrong came when every phone in the car glitched at once. Screens flashed white, showed static, or just rebooted. My earbuds burst with garbled radio chatter. Even the suit guy dropped his paper to check his phone. The numbers on his lock screen smeared and jittered. The college kid across the aisle smacked his phone helplessly as the screen pulsed like a heartbeat. The overhead lights dimmed and hummed louder than normal. After a few more feet, we stopped completely. No announcements came. No conductor appeared. Just silence, broken only by the hum of lights and cooling metal ticks. Now sometimes I catch myself checking the mailbox, half expecting to see a white square inside. At night I get this feeling like someone's just stepped away from my bed. The way the air shifts, like weightlifting from a mattress. The morning commute started normally enough until everything changed in an instant. The train suddenly stopped, and that's when I noticed it. A strange gray haze pressed against the windows. It wasn't dark or light, just flat and thick, impossible to see through. When I touched the glass, it was cold and dry, definitely not condensation. The silence hit next. The usual train hum disappeared completely, leaving only a ringing in my ears. People started getting nervous. A woman muttered, "What the hell?" while some guy tried forcing open the door between cars. It wouldn't move, no matter how hard he pulled. Just as suddenly as it stopped, everything snapped back to normal. The train lurched forward, lights blazed back on, and phones started chiming everywhere with delayed notifications. The windows showed the usual passing fields again. People seemed relieved, mumbling things like "finally," and "what was that?" That's when things got weird. My phone showed an 11-minute jump in time, but that wasn't the strangest part. People were missing. The woman in the red scarf, the older man with his backpack, even that kid who'd been tapping his phone, all gone. The doors hadn't opened during the stop, so they couldn't have left. The businessman sitting across from me noticed too. When I asked about it, he seemed uncertain, but agreed there had been more passengers. Nobody else would acknowledge it later. The conductor came through, but when passengers discussed it, their stories were different. Someone claimed the red scarf woman was never there. Another person insisted the corner seat had always been empty. But I knew better. You recognize your fellow regulars after months of commuting. By the time we reached Union Station, everything felt almost normal again. Everyone was back to their phones and routines. I nearly convinced myself I'd imagined it all, until I checked the transit app that night. According to the records, the 712 train never stopped or slowed down that morning. My phone showed no activity during those missing 11 minutes, just a blank space in time as if it had been switched off. But I know it wasn't. Around 9 p.m., I started up the Ashokan High Point Trail in the Catskills. I'd been there before, and it seemed like a good spot for a short night hike to clear my head after work. Looking back, hiking alone in late October wasn't my smartest move. The conditions seemed fine. Cold but manageable. Clear skies, no wind. I had the basics covered, a good flashlight, spare batteries, and my phone for GPS. Night hiking wasn't new to me, so I felt confident about my simple plan to hike a few miles, take a snack break, and head back before midnight. Things started getting weird at the first overlook about 1.5 miles up. My phone's GPS wouldn't load. The blue dot just kept spinning even though I had cell signal. I couldn't pull up the trail map, which I wanted since everything looked so different in the dark. I called my friend Mason to help me check the 2/3 rail map, but instead of ringing, the call filled with static. That's when it got truly strange. Through the static, I heard whispers, not Mason's voice, but something else entirely. It was unnaturally quiet, like someone speaking right into the microphone, giving me latitude and longitude coordinates in slow, broken pieces. When the call dropped and I tried again, the exact same thing happened. Static, whispers, the same numbers. My text to Mason wouldn't go through, so I saved the coordinates in my notes app. They didn't match any place I knew. I tried to stay calm, telling myself phones just act up sometimes. But as I kept hiking, the woods felt wrong. The moon slipped behind clouds, making everything darker. My headlamp worked fine, but the trees seemed to close in around me. The silence was heavy. No owls, no rustling leaves, no cracking branches. Just my footsteps. The next day when I took the train, something else was off. The guy in the navy suit who always sat in the same spot wasn't there. His seat stayed empty and I've never seen him since. The strangeness started when I took a water break about 30 minutes into my hike. A low hum filled the air, not static, but a vibration that pressed against my chest. It wasn't coming from any specific direction, just everywhere at once. My phone's battery had mysteriously drained from 70% to 19%, even though I'd barely used it. The forest began to feel different as I decided to head back. The trail looked wrong somehow, and weird bluish lights like glow sticks kept appearing between the trees. Every time I tried to get a good look, they'd disappear. Then my phone buzzed unexpectedly. New notes had appeared without me touching it. Those same coordinates showed up again, complete with timestamps. Everything intensified at once. The hum became deafening. making me drop my phone. My headlamp cut out briefly, and in those few seconds, I caught a glimpse of something. A tall, pale figure at the edge of the beam. That's when I started running, not caring about the risk of injury. I just needed to get out. What happened next is mostly blank in my mind. I remember running, then the hum suddenly cutting off. The next thing I knew, I was lying on my back in the middle of the trail. My flashlight was off beside me and my phone was dead in my pocket. It was 3:17 a.m. and several hours were missing from my memory. Despite my aching legs suggesting I'd walked for miles, I was in the same section of trail as before. Oddly, when I powered my phone back on, the battery showed 68%, exactly where it had been before the strange drain. Everything looked normal except for 2 entries in my notes app. Coordinates time-stamped at 9:48 p.m. and 12:12 a.m. The walk back to my car was uneventful. The forest had returned to its normal nighttime self, no hum, no lights, no whispers. Later, when I checked the coordinates at home, they pointed to nowhere. The Prairie View Lodge materialized after a long day driving across Kansas. By 10 p.m., exhaustion had won, and I couldn't go any further. The place was nothing special, just a gravel lot with a line of rooms and a flickering neon vacancy sign. Despite the name, there wasn't much of a view to speak of. The parking lot caught my attention right away. Every spot was taken, cars and trucks packed in tight. But inside the office, it was dead quiet. Just me and the gentle hum of a soda machine. After about a minute of waiting, a man emerged from a back door. Mid-50s, gray hair, wearing a plaid shirt tucked into jeans, ordinary looking enough. The check-in was brief and strange. No small talk, no amenities mentioned, just a key to room 12 and a pointing gesture. My room was at the far end. Opening the door released a strong bleach smell. Everything else was standard motel fare, made bed, worn carpet, generic wall art, but something felt off. Despite the packed parking lot, there was complete silence. No footsteps, no voices, no TV noise bleeding through the walls. Looking through the blind showed all the cars still there, but no signs of life, no movement, no lit windows, nothing but vehicles under the orange lot lights. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe everyone had turned in early. But around midnight, I woke to an unsettling sound. A murmur of voices, dozens of them, all talking at once. Not from a TV, these were real voices, muffled but distinct, coming through the walls. Men, women, young, old, all mixed together in an impossible jumble. I couldn't make out any words, just this strange rhythm of voices that seemed to go on and on like a distant crowd that never quite came into focus. I've never returned to that stretch of road. That patch of woods, miles from any trail or civilization, holds something I don't care to understand. Through the walls came voices, but not like any normal crowd. They moved in perfect unison, rising and falling together as if choreographed. My first response was to knock on the wall, thinking it might quiet them down. But the voices continued, unwavering in their rhythm. Then I heard it, my name. Not just once or twice, but over and over, woven into their steady murmur. This stopped me cold. Nobody in that room should know my name. The desk clerk was the only person I'd told it to. "Hello," I whispered, instantly regretting it. The voices cut off completely. Complete silence fell. I retreated to the bed, eyes fixed on the door. The parking lot suddenly seemed very far away. My car isolated on the far side. Though I considered leaving, I couldn't bring myself to step outside. After 10 minutes of silence, I started doubting myself. Maybe I dozed off and dreamed it. But at 3 a.m., they started again. This time louder, and now from both walls, left and right. The same chorus of voices speaking my name in perfect unison. Their tone eerily calm and measured. My heart raced as I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to vibrate in my chest. It had the precise timing of a looped recording. When I grabbed my phone to call for help, I found no signal. The screen dimmed, flickered, and went black. It wouldn't turn back on. The voices grew more distinct, as if moving closer to the walls. They seemed to press down from the ceiling, too. The room's lights flickered and died, leaving me in total darkness. The voices filled every space, endlessly repeating my name. Time felt distorted. The air grew thick and electric, like just before a storm. Eventually, I lost consciousness. I woke to daylight and a working TV showing local news. My phone sat on the nightstand, fully charged though I hadn't plugged it in. Looking out the window, I saw just 3 random cars in the lot. The night everything changed started as a routine shift at the radio station. There, I was doing late night. Small Town, one of those shows where you hear more frogs than callers. I was sipping stale coffee, running through songs I didn't care about. The studio lights were dim, the street outside a black smear, and the building's heat pulsed in and out like a tired animal. I did the usual things. Pulled playlists, wandered the board, checked the rare email that slipped past the spam filter. I liked how mindlessly safe it felt. My engineer Malik had buzzed me from the production room with a pre-roll, so I cut to commercials to play a voicemail. Just another late-night confession. Someone crying about a breakup at 2 a.m. In our small town, the lone DJ's job was to let these people hear themselves on air. A small mercy. We ran our minute of ads, the standard loop AB5, out local diners and sponsors. Then I put my headphones on, and they hugged my skull like a warm hollow thing. That's when it started. At first it seemed like a bad audio file mixed into the chain, just a thin warble under the spot ads, like someone pressing a finger on spinning tape. But then that warble became a voice, my voice. It said my name exactly how I say it when I hear myself recorded. That lilt I hate. It was distorted, like hearing it through glass but urgent. Marty, let me out. Not a request. More like a plea played 1,000 times until the edges wore away. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe an echo, a prank, audio bleeding through. But the hair on my neck stood up and stayed up. I ripped the headphones off. Malik's door was open, showing him hunched over his laptop adjusting levels. The studio had that paper and cigarette smell of an old theater. There weren't a dozen people in the motel the next morning like the night before. I packed quickly. Outside, the air was dead still. The office was locked up tight, blinds drawn. I didn't bother checking out, just threw my stuff in the car and left that lot behind. Now it's a year later. I still have that motel key to room 12 in a drawer somewhere. Its plastic tag is cracked down the middle like someone bent it in half. I don't remember doing that. The day started normally, just another Tuesday night shift. I was doing the routine checks when my own voice came through the headphones, pleading to be let out. I asked Malik if he'd caught it. He surfaced from his work like someone pulled from deep water, mentioning only static that sounded like a generator before shrugging and returning to his task. Everything looked normal on paper. The commercial break played at 2:30 a.m. as scheduled. The board recorder's playback was clean. Just the usual sponsor message and jingle. Stream monitor showed no backfeed and web listeners were coming and going at typical rates. No call-ins, no messages, no unusual traffic reports. But it had happened. Under the humming fluorescent lights, I kept repeating it to myself, trying to make it sound normal. Later, Malik tested me, half joking. You heard it too, right? But he'd only caught my voice sideways. The evidence was frustratingly absent. Studio recorder, raw 2-track, stream log. None had captured the pleading. Malik suggested, gently, that late-night minds sometimes play tricks. I drove home through light rain, the roads like silver ribbons, town looking freshly painted with delicate strokes. The station lights faded behind me, and I only thought about the voice at intersections. I went through the motions of normal bedtime, setting the alarm, coffee grinder waiting in the kitchen. Sleep came too heavy to trust. At 8 a.m., over burnt coffee, Malik texted about the backup. We called each other comparing notes. He found nothing in the patch logs or circuit diagrams, but talked about phase shifts. Precise words that should have helped, but didn't. We fell into the helpless quiet of an empty tool chest. The day continued routinely. Grocery ads, river emergency notice, storm-related school cancellations. Then at 3 p.m., a woman I didn't know called the station, asking for me by name. Late at night in the studio, I positioned the headphones carefully and run the final commercial spot live. My eyes fixed on the meters. I searched for any anomaly. Nothing. No voice, no whisper. I pause the playback and hold the headphones near the desk mic, knowing it's ridiculous but determined to catch any phase ghost lurking in the room. That's when I feel it again, the breath in my ear, just like last week. Not really a sound, more of a presence. Shallow, waiting. The control board pings as I pull my hand from the slider. Slee. Ep doesn't come easily that night. I keep getting up to check the kitchen mic recording, but it only shows normal sounds. My footsteps, the kettle, house creaks. The single oddity is a tiny blip at 2:12 a.m., a split-second gap like a tear in reality. These seems become part of working nights, along with the static bursts, drunk callers at 3, and self-destructing tapes. I try convincing myself it's all dramatic thinking, just feedback from the console reflecting my own voice. Anything to avoid dwelling on how eerily precise that timbre had been. It started with the old woman calling about the quarry. Her voice trembled as she described seeing a light, like a star hovering too close, feeling watched through glass. She'd asked for an old Stones track to fill my remaining shift, as if music could repair the night's tears. I'd noted the time of her sighting, our small way of making strange storms manageable. I set up that second microphone on the kitchen table that evening. Mullet came by to see the setup, chuckling at what seemed like professional paranoia. We stood there with lousy coffee, listening to rain hit the roof and the house's quiet hum. A week later, she called again. She'd been walking her dog by the quarry water when she heard it, a wheezing voice like a mistuned radio. Then she spoke my name, asking if I'd ever experienced time shifting, that feeling of the world deliberately rearranging itself during a blink. I said no to be polite, and because saying yes would open doors better left closed. The night shift at the radio station changed after that automation drop. 2 minutes of dead air during the noon hour, ending in our scene-off tone. The monitor showed nothing but a flat line where voices should have been. We got lucky, no angry calls, just the usual afternoon crowd drifting through, not caring much about anything. The real trouble started when I checked the playback. At 2:12 a.m., the kitchen mic picked up something strange, a waveform that looked like someone trying to form words. It matched my voice perfectly. Malik's hands shook as he saved the clip in 3 places. We sent it to a friend at the university's audio lab, mostly to calm our nerves. The lab guy called back using that careful, soothing tone that never actually soothes. He said there were no normal distortion patterns, nothing that matched known equipment signatures. It only showed up on that one mic that one night. But when we tried to play it back, there was nothing, just paper silence where that desperate voice had been. I'd been waking up with a weird smell on my nose, like hot metal, like a sun-warmed coin. It wouldn't go away. Malik joked about me being haunted by sponsors, and I laughed, but it felt wrong. About 2 days after the incident, I found a mark on my forearm, a thin, pale line like someone had dragged a fingernail across it, and the skin had healed around it. Malik called it stress because people need to name things. I couldn't bring myself to lie and say I'd done it myself. The station kept running. People called in, trucks rumbled past breathing diesel into the darkness. I slept worse, then got used to sleeping worse, the way you get used to an old pain until it's just part of your life. That small talk, those impossible moments bleeding into ordinary things, they became part of the furniture too. A month later, I went to meet the woman who had called. Sometimes things exist and don't exist at once. I'd read about that in old sci-fi and vacuum tube manuals, but now I was living it in those quiet hours when the board was silent and my laptop showed 2:12. A cheap gray disposable camera sat on the kitchen table when we opened the back door of the rental cabin. It looked out of place there, more like something yo would find behind tourism brochures than on the counter where you're planning to sleep. Sarah gave it a gentle poke, asking who it might belong to. I just shrugged and tucked it in my bag. There was a shallow dip in the rock, bowl-like, that she pointed out to me. She said it felt wrong there, like it was watching. I stood with my hands in my pockets, trying to look like I belonged in the daylight. The air carried the scent of rain and copper pennies, while back in town the radio station kept humming. Regular life went on. Hair salon ads and pizza commercials threading through people's daily drives. I found myself back home later, unclipping my headphones in my quiet kitchen. My reflection looked like something that had listened too much. The radio show continued as always, people calling in, requesting songs for their heartbreaks and missing pets. I played them all, finding comfort in the honest work and their genuine feelings. In the early hours, around 2:12 a.m., I'd catch my voice bouncing off the shower steam. It made me wonder if voices ask to escape because they want somewhere new, or because they're trying to leave somewhere behind. The recording stayed on an untouched drive, never opened, never deleted. I kept that silence like a forgotten object in a pocket. Small, sharp, maybe useful someday. Late-night radio kept doing its peculiar but normal work. Songs, commercials, weather updates, and occasional confessions from strangers. The voice would appear only when it chose to be heard, vanishing whenever someone tried to record it. I had to tell my wife eventually, with lights on and tea brewing, secrets only spoil the truth. She listened carefully, touching the mark on my arm like checking if fruit was ripe. Maybe someone is trapped, she said. Not quite an answer, but not nothing either. I'm still unsure if anyone was actually stuck there. I don't know how to release a voice that sounds exactly like your own, or why some evidence stays while other moments vanish without a trace. What remains are the board logs, lab reports, the silence, and this small healed line on my wrist. Like something had briefly pressed a listening device there. We needed an escape from the city's chaos, so we headed to the Cape for the weekend. The rental process was simple, just our names and a card for the lockbox. We found ourselves in a weathered cabin perched on a small bluff complete with salt-worn shingles and a slightly crooked porch. That first night brought a thick fog from the sea, muffling the waves to a steady whisper. The air was heavy with salt and the scent of wet rope. We had the whole place to ourselves. In the old-fashioned twilight, time seemed to stop. A simple dinner, too much wine, and silly jokes about turning in early filled our evening. A gusty wind stirred me awake around 2 a.m. The shingles creaked their protests, but I quickly drifted back to sleep. When morning came, I found Sarah by the window, wrapped in a French banner, fighting off the morning chill. She clutched her camera, wearing that smile that always meant she discovered something intriguingly strange. The kind of oddity that makes vacation stories worth telling. Sarah had gotten the film developed at a local shop the night before. The curious staff had even scanned them. She laid out the prints across the table. Typical vacation snapshots of kids playing on the beach, the porch bathed in golden light, a wet dog shaking off water. We shared a laugh at our goofy pre-development selfie. Then Sarah showed me one more photo. It captured our bedroom, clearly not staged, with grainy edges from a cheap flash. There we were in bed, me facing the pillow, Sarah on her back with a thumb near her mouth, her usual position during restless nights. The shop's timestamp read 2:13 a.m. My voice cracked as I mentioned not remembering any nighttime photos. Sarah admitted she thought she might have taken it while drunk or excited, but her expression turned serious. She never left her camera out overnight. We stared at the photo together, the kitchen light buzzing above us, holding the image like it might burn our fingers. The evening had been simple enough. We shared wine after dinner, watched an unremarkable movie, and walked to the cove, drawn by how the fog transformed everything into ghostly photographs. I made some comment about the ocean sounding like a distant train. Normal things. Peaceful things. We turned off the lights, slipped under the covers, went through our usual routines. That's why the photos made no sense. We hadn't taken any pictures. There was no memory of a camera, no clicks, no flashes. Sarah suggested previous guests might have left them, which seemed reasonable on the surface. People do leave things behind. But there were 3 photos, each more unsettling than the last. The first showed our bed. The second was a close-up from the foot of the bed, grainier, with flash catching Sarah's cheekbones like islands of light in the curve of my shoulder. No timestamp, just grain and what looked like condensation on the lens. The third photo stopped our hearts. The same bed, same angle, but with something standing at the frame's right side. Not a complete figure, just a column of darker gray, like someone out of focus, backlit. The flash had caught hints of a shoulder, the suggestion of a head. The way our bodies lay under the covers, how the air seemed to bend around that shape. It made my throat tight. We checked everything immediately. All windows were latched. The deadbolt worked perfectly. On the porch door, we found a scuff we hadn't seen before, like someone had pressed against it with their palm. Our footprints in the sand ended at the dune grass, vanishing where wet sand met water. I drove to the photo shop in town. The late shift worker, looking worn down by too many nights, ran his fingers through his hair as he told me about a soaking wet woman who'd dropped off the camera at 6 a.m., clutching a hat in both hands. The phone call at the rental agency gave us the typical response. A single woman had booked the place a month before, paid by credit card, no names. The owner brushed it off, saying people often left cameras behind. Old houses have their ways was all he added when we asked about any reports of strange pictures. The wind finally settled on our last night, fog hovering like a quiet crowd in the distance. Sarah and I couldn't stand the house's emptiness, so we left the TV on for company, some cooking show murmuring in the background while the kettle made soft ticking sounds. We placed the camera on the table near the couch, pretending it didn't bother us. Around 1 a.m., Sarah woke me up. She'd heard something like a zipper from the next room. I found nothing when I checked. The camera sat there looking deceptively normal, just a simple plastic thing meant for simple snapshots. The aftermath lingered. Sarah mentioned feeling off like someone had left a handprint inside her chest. A mystery bruise appeared on her shoulder the next morning, a pale crescent mark with no matching scrape on the quilt, no broken wood to explain it. It vanished after a few days, like most unexplained injuries do. My friends noticed I sounded different the following week. I kept the photo of the figure framed against better judgment even though it made the house feel colder. Our drive home was deliberately slow, not because of road conditions, but because we wanted to delay returning to the city's bright lights and busy schedules that would make everything seem less real. The camera rode in the glove box like an unwanted passenger. Later, the prints joined the pile of items in my kitchen that needed sorting, things that demanded more thought than I was ready to give them. At the Blue Gull, he'd left $5 on the counter and hurried out, insisting she hadn't wanted the film left there. When asked about the woman's appearance, he just shrugged and said, "Rain makes people all kind of the same to me. Sorry, The interstate stretched out before me, I-80 between Cheyenne and Larimore. Straight, dull, and exactly what I needed. Past midnight, I drove through darkness, wanting to outrun the fog the forecast promised would lift by morning. The road was perfect. Minimal traffic, few trucks, just me and the oldies station as my companion. That's when the radio started acting up. Not your typical tower fade, but this strange mechanical warble eating the music every few seconds. I tried other stations, but they all had it. This weird thin static like a ham radio bleeding through. I told myself it was just a storm cell somewhere ahead, but then I spotted that blue Corolla on the shoulder, its brake lights dim in the night. The aftermath was worse than the incident itself. Life went on with its maddening normalcy. Work emails, grocery shopping, Sarah's casual texts about long meetings. We kept that photo, though we rarely spoke about it unless we were alone. It became like an unfinished sentence on our shelf, waiting for an ending that never came. Weeks later, I dreamed of that bedroom again. The fog had crept inside, pressing against the curtains. Sarah was there, sleeping just like in the photo, thumb in mouth, smiling. But when I reached for her, I found another hand already there on the pillow, pale, motionless. We never returned to that cabin. We avoided foggy nights and stayed clear of strange cameras, left on tables. But we kept the prints. Maybe because throwing them away meant denying it all happened. Or maybe because acknowledging being watched while you sleep feels worse than not knowing. Now I have one photo framed on my bookshelf. Sometimes, passing by mirrors at night, I studied the shadows in room corners and wonder about the person who needed those pictures developed so urgently. I search for movement in the gray where the figure stands in the photo. It never shifts, never leaves. Just waits there like a question that won't be answered. The air had a metallic, rainy taste, though no rain was falling. Something else mixed in, like hot wiring, ozone, and that sterile hospital corridor smell. I couldn't quite name it. I'd started noticing them about an hour into my drive. First, just a hunched figure in an idling car. Not sleeping, they sat too rigidly, staring straight ahead. Their pale hands gripped the wheel, chest completely still. No breathing I could see. The fog seemed to eat all sound beyond a certain point. Horns, footsteps, even idling engines got swallowed up in it. I couldn't tell if that silence was natural or something else. My phone buzzed, Jenna asking if I was okay driving alone. I texted back, "Yeah, fine," before the screen suddenly went black. Not dimming or locking, just dead. The battery had been over half full when I'd left. They kept appearing along the shoulder. A black SUV, a pickup, sedans. All with running engines, no hazard triangles or emergency calls, just drivers sitting perfectly still like they were waiting for some show to start. I crept past each one like I was in a funeral line, half expecting someone to wave for help. Nobody moved. By mile marker 219, I spotted whole clusters I'd missed earlier. Their headlights painted the shoulder orange through foggy windows. I had to check, had to find some explanation. Hat made sense? I leaned out my window and saw them clearer now. Young faces, old faces, uniformed men, a woman clutching a child's backpack. All frozen, some with heads tilted like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. Not one of them looked my way when I shone my flashlight across them. I thought I saw someone blink, but realized it was just my own dry eyes playing tricks. The moment passed and I felt a sudden urge to stop moving completely. I pulled into the nearest rest area, switched off my engine. The place was lit up but completely empty. Just picnic tables and silence. The interstate stretched ahead, empty as a stage between shows. No headlights pierced the darkness, no cars sat parked on the shoulder. My footsteps crunched against gravel as I walked, leaving solitary prints in the dust. My breath formed clouds in the cold air. Earlier at the rest stop, I'd knelt to check my tires, needing something real to do with my hands. The vending machine stood like silent props, and the highway's hum felt distant. When I'd pressed my ear to the closed restroom door, I heard nothing, not even plumbing sounds. My watch showed 12:37. I couldn't remember how long I'd been on the road. Standing up from the tires, I noticed my odometer. 137,982. It was the kind of number you'd only remember if it were round. With my phone dead, I grabbed an old receipt from the glove box and wrote it down. The act felt strangely urgent. Back on the highway, my headlights caught movement ahead. Cars lined the shoulder, their engine lights glowing. As I drove past, static crackled from the radio, briefly forming what might have been my name. Just a whispered half-syllable that could have been radio interference. I tried to stay calm and keep driving. At mile marker 238, everything snapped. Not like blinking, more like hitting a mental pothole. The car shuddered, my temples throbbed, and suddenly my mind felt ice clear. When I opened my eyes, the shoulder was empty. No cars, no people, just the endless road and fields. The fog had become mist and the radio fell silent. The odometer now read 138.62. My body tensed before I processed those numbers. An 80-mile jump. I told myself I must have dozed off with cruise control, but my watch said 12:42. Only 5 minutes had passed since the rest stop. My skin tingled like after too much sun, and my fingers buzzed with the same frequency I'd heard on the radio. I pulled into a turnout and killed the engine. Moving felt wrong somehow, like participating in something I shouldn't. I sat there, alone on an empty road, trying to make sense of what had happened. The last 80 miles should be there in my memory, but instead there's just this soft, empty space, like pressing your thumb into wet sand and finding nothing underneath. I made those calls that night, first to my sister, then to my boss. Long, awkward messages. When Jenna called back, sleep dragged at her voice. "You okay? You sound weird?" she asked. I tried keeping my answers normal, just mentioned some fog and cars on the shoulder. She told me to head home, and I felt like a kid who'd learned to keep quiet about strange things adults wouldn't want to hear. The rest of the drive was ordinary enough. Dark highway stretching ahead, me watching the odometer tick up steadily, not jumping around. By the time I pulled into my driveway, dawn was starting to bleach the sky. The grass was damp but untouched. My house looked exactly as a house should look. Everything inside was where I'd left it a week ago. The kettle, my jacket on the couch, keys in the bowl by the door. I sat down and tried to piece things together, but only fragments came. White light on the shoulder, distant engine sounds, this weird metallic taste in my mouth. None of it made a proper story. I spent the next few days checking everything I could. Gas receipts, mileage app logs, warehouse security footage. The warehouse camera showed a blue screen corrupted file. For that night, the mileage app had impossible numbers. 79.9 miles somehow covered between 12:36 and 12:37 a.m. Someone who knew their way around the system had messed with those numbers. There was this mark on my wrist, a pale oval like a coin print. Didn't hurt. Went away after a week, but seeing it in the mirror each morning felt wrong. Like my skin had been borrowed and returned slightly damaged. When people asked questions, suggesting drinking or medication, I played along. Those explanations give people comfort, but blackouts don't work like that. They leave ragged edges, not clean cuts. There was something else out there that night, waiting in the fog. The radio made that thin warble sound, and I found myself counting seconds between breaths like someone measuring heartbeats. It was the kind of night that should have sprawled into lost hours and tangled explanations, but it didn't. Instead, there was just this clean hole in the darkness, as if someone had carefully cut out a piece of the night and walked away with it. I went back a week later in broad daylight. Everything looked normal. Parked cars, people, families going about their day. At the rest stop, I checked my odometer, 137, 9-982. Exactly the same as before. Every fact I dug up either fought with the others or gave me nothing at all. What really stuck with me were those drivers on the shoulder. They weren't passed out or lifeless, they looked focused, like they were listening hard to something only they could hear. For weeks after, I'd snap awake between 2 and 3 a.m., sitting up in bed, straining to catch that toneless chorus again. Sometimes I'd hear a faint buzz in the quiet, just like that night. On the road. My yard stayed dark at 3 a.m., and time kept moving forward like it should. I buried myself in work, deliveries, paperwork, everyday problems. It helped me not think about that empty stretch of road and those people in their cars, engines humming, hands on their steering wheels, tuned in to something beyond my hearing. The morning I left my pickup, the world was buried in fresh snow, white and pristine. Like every map I'd ever seen, the night's snowfall had been heavy and wet, piling up around tree trunks and filling old logging tracks. I could see my breath in the cold air. The trails were the obvious choice, but I wanted silence, so I headed for Harlan's cleared fields where I wouldn't crunch through cedar branches. I put on my snowshoes, grabbed my rifle, and headed into the pines. The morning started quiet, the air so cold that only the sharpest sounds could break through it. I looked carefully at the ground between trees. This ridge always had deer in winter, and I was looking for their signs, tracks, droppings, places where they'd slept. About a quarter-mile in, I spotted the first prints, not human tracks, but 3 toed marks. In an unfamiliar clearing, I found something that didn't make sense. The tracks I followed weren't from any creature I knew. Not a coyote, not a fox. They reminded me of what my neighbor described last spring. Something smaller than a deer. with tracks like a rabbit's feet stretched by a knife. The snow there looked deliberately arranged, not wild like nature usually leaves it. What caught my eye was a spiral pattern, precise and intentional. Each turn brought the tracks closer to the center, creating a tight coil that spanned about 20 yards. This wasn't natural. Animals don't move in geometric patterns, they roam freely. Even foxes leave chaotic trails. At the spiral's heart, where three-toed prints overlapped like a comet's tail, stood my boots. Not just any boots, my exact pair, the ones I'd worn to drive here before switching to snowshoes. The details matched perfectly. Worn leather, flat tongues, even the distinctive black paint mark on the left heel from Harlan's Farm's gate repair. The laces were tucked in, and they stood eerily straight in a small bowl of snow. The seam made my throat tighten. There were no other signs, no backpack, no human footprints, nothing to explain how those boots got there. Just that mysterious spiral and my boots standing alone in virgin snow. When I touched them, they were ice cold, covered in frost that carried the scent of my truck's cab and those cigarettes I'd quit. I tried calling out, hoping to break the eerie silence. My voice sounded sharp and unnatural, disappearing into the trees. Only a chickadee's steady thumping replied from nearby. The rational part of me wanted to blame this on other hunters, Heron, Pete, or some local kid playing pranks. But who could know about that specific paint mark? Who would create such an elaborate scene with those strange animal tracks? I don't see a complete text to rewrite. The fragment provided appears to be part of a larger piece, but it cuts off mid-sentence. Could you please provide the complete text you'd like me to reorganize? I am unable to rewrite or restructure this fragment as it appears incomplete. The given text misplaced them. Maybe I'd left them pulled from the cab. Is only a partial sentence or thought without enough context to understand the full meaning or information that needs to be preserved. To help restructure the content, please provide the complete text you'd like me to work with.